when things go bad, if we sink to bad times on that merry-go-round in the 21st century, with all the power we have and all the many different kinds of existential risks we have, nukes is just one of them now. It could be the worst ever.
There's something going on in culture right now that is driving us into what you call the primitive mind, which is not necessarily an ideal place to be thinking from. What is the primitive mind, and why in this unique moment do people find themselves there?
I use the example of like Skittles or brownies or, these things are hard to resist, even though a huge part of your brain is saying like, no, this is just like trash sugar. It's going to make you feel bad and you're going to gain weight. Like it's bad across the board, except it tastes good for 1 second. The primate doesn't understand that. And it's thinking, we just found dense, high calorie food. This is precious. Eat as much as you can because you don't know where we're going to get it next, right? So it's this, we're crazy people. We're crazy. And we live in this advanced civilization where so many of our natural programming, tendencies actually hurt us and misfire. So we're constantly in this kind of tug of war. And so that's the kind of general situation that applies to, I think, most problems in humanity and most personal struggles we have. You can kind of boil it down to, there's this tug of war going on because we've been kidnapped out of our home forest somewhere and we've been dropped into an advanced civilization and we're trying to do our best. So I like to think about how this applies to when I look at like political tribalism or something like that, which is very prevalent today. And something in the environment's been changing super quickly. Social media just started and it's like completely changed the world, and the internet was pretty new. And mobile phones, and there's that's all these giant seismic environmental changes, which throw off the balance in these tug of war we've got, both individually and society. We have kind of a grand tug of war going on, and so I start, that's what I've been doing a lot of thinking about is, okay, I see a lot of kind of things that are the political version of eating Skittles and brownies, which is, hating half the country and feeling like you're perfect and righteous, and the us group is great and the them group is awful. Like that's just junk food of a different kind, right? That's base primal behavior that doesn't naturally make sense, and it's not good for us and it's not good for others. And it's on the rise, clearly, right? You see it around you, and you also see it in plenty of surveys and polls. And so that's what I've been thinking a lot about. Why, right? What are the environmental changes, and why are they stoking this kind of decline in the U.S., at least in the national tug of war, and a lot of us as people.
If we look at the primitive mind as us 50,000 years ago, and we think about the baser instincts, why do those base instincts feel good? Why is the righteous indignation it feels so awesome? Why would that be from an evolutionary standpoint?
The program is very simple. And this developed over not just 50,000 years, but this is billions of years going back, right? Through our whole evolution, the program is very simple in terms of its goal. The genes that you carry, they're still around right now because they happen to be unbelievable at survival, right? They've survived through fish, through reptiles and rodents and other primates and great apes, and now they're in you. Most of the genes didn't make it this far. So everyone today, their genes are amazing at survival. And so the goal of your programming is that you're the animal that is surrounding these genes. You're just you're developed in the way you are. You are physically and mentally who you are because every little part of you is good at serving the core purpose, which is keeping those genes immortal, passing them on, right? You're going to die, but your genes can stay immortal if you pass them on.
How dare you, Tim Urban?
You know what? Maybe it also with the crazy future we have, maybe we can upload our consciousness.
I certainly hope so.
But the point is that it just is so simple in so many ways. Something that helps you pass your genes along is going to, because of so much evolution, make the animal feel good. It's going to reward the animal with dopamine and other kinds of happy chemicals, because that's what the programming does. It basically, if you want your dog to do something, right, you give it a treat. But that's just what you're really doing is the dog doesn't care about the treat. That when they eat the treat, they get the dopamine hit. The dog cares about the dopamine hit and is addicted right? Like all of us. And so you give the dog a treat, it hits the dopamine hit. So that's like really the dog's brain is the one giving it the real treat, right? And you're triggering something that gives the secondary treat. And so it's a similar idea with us is that the things your brain naturally rewards you for are going to be things that helped you to pass on your genes. So what does that mean? To pass on your genes, you have to survive, right? You can't die, especially at a young age. You have to survive, which means you need calories. You need to stay safe. And then, of course, you need to reproduce, which is why humans are all maniacally obsessed with sex. And then now the genes are in your kids. So suddenly you'll throw yourself off a cliff before you'll throw your kid off a cliff, which makes no sense, except it does if you're thinking about the fact that the genes are in the younger, healthier container now. So the genes are telling you, protect that thing over yourself. Right. So again,
So crazy.
right. And this is all very obvious. I know I'm not, it's just that if you think about, why does Skittles taste good? Because back then something that tasted dense and sweet like that was probably a really high calorie food, which was critical to eat because you didn't know when you were going to get food. Now your question, why does, political tribalism feel good in the same kind of primitive, blissful kind of way? And it's because the tribes that, to survive, for your genes to pass on, the best thing you really needed, you couldn't survive alone. Humans alone would be in big trouble. You needed to have a village and a tribe around you. And so we are desperate to seek out connection and community and to be in the good graces of the people closest to us. And if there's a group of cool kids and they're ostracizing the uncool kids, you really want to be in the cool kid group. That's just our DNA. We want to be included. And our nightmare is to be ostracized, to be the one that everyone's talking shit about behind your back. We hate that. And again, that doesn't make sense. Who cares, right? It's just we're all going to die. Who cares what they're saying? Because our dumb primitive brains are horrified because they think we are now going to get cut out of the life raft, which is this support group, this community, and we're cut out of that. We're going to die. And if you get rejected by a girl when you go up to her, it's horrifying because all the other girls now in the tribe are going to laugh at you, and you're never going to mate. You're never going to pass on your genes. Of course, in today, that doesn't make sense. You can get rejected and it doesn't matter, but our brains continually are misinterpreting the world around us.
The way you describe that, it seems really, really true, but also begs the question, then how on earth did we get to the point where the Enlightenment is real, that we have the scientific method, and we've created all this amazing stuff? We, at some point, somehow, some way, began to elevate above that. And I don't know how kids today will take the following statement, but as a child of the 80s, it feels like we were doing really well for a while, at least in the US. Freedom of speech was like a core tenet, individuality, being able to think for yourself, being celebrated for that. Now it feels like we're going in the wrong direction. How did we get escape velocity at first, even before we talk about how we're getting pulled back down?
If you think about how much self-help books and people who give advice on the internet and people who give medical or nutrition or fitness advice or productivity advice, right? And people build these systems. What's happening is that basically all of this is this struggle to, okay, let's make systems and habits and routines that can protect us from our own worst desires. So a simple one is don't buy unhealthy food for your house if you want to eat more healthy, right? Commit to a gym routine and form a habit. And so people are constantly in their own lives forming these systems, which are like these structures that you can build, these artificial structures that you can build that can kind of support you and keep you afloat so you don't drift down into kind of your worst instincts and your most nonsensical instincts. They're not evil. They don't make sense for your life. They're going to push your life in the wrong direction. So we build all these systems. You have diets, right? A diet is just a system, and you're going to maybe do it with a group of people. These are all ways to kind of outsmart our primitive instincts and try to kind of build a structure. So the Enlightenment is just that on a massive scale. The Enlightenment itself is kind of, is a ton of philosophy about the best systems that groups can use, that countries can use.
To what end?
So if a human is just following their base instincts, they're just, scarfing down junk food, right? if a group of people is following their base instincts, you've got warlords and dictators and slaves and super oppression and no upward mobility and no justice, right? That's the state of nature. We've done this so many times. Look at history. It's like you can have this moment when, things seem better, and then there's civilization collapses, and you end up with, again, you have these warlords, and you've got dictatorships. And this is so humans have suffered so much by kind of falling into, think about, the hierarchy is something that is kind of a natural thing for us to fall into this thing, which is why we all want to kind of please the scary authorities. And so the Enlightenment is trying to say, what is a better way here? What is the true human nature that produces that? Is it that you need a brutal dictator in order to control humans? Because otherwise they will just get out of hand and start murdering each other. Or, and this is more what the Enlightenment thinkers thought, is actually human nature isn't necessarily that bad. It just needs some basic laws and structures that can prevent people from, prevent the worst actors among them from taking over and from overpowering each other and from harming each other. And at that point, actually humans can function very well together. So it's kind of this nuanced thing between, you have tyranny and anarchy, right? Which anarchy often then melts away into tyranny and
doesn't it always?
Yeah. And so this is saying, what if we do something in the middle, where instead of saying there's these rigid, ironclad laws and every single person is under the control of the king, you say, actually, there's going to be freedom, and the government's going to have a very limited ability to do anything. But there's going to be this big, wide fence with ironclad walls on the wide fence, which is that you can't harm someone else, physically. You can't steal their property, things like that. Equal justice under the law. You're going to have, equal rights. You're going to have when you're going to be totally free. But if you start harassing people and punching people and stealing their things, very quickly you're going to end up in jail. So there is an iron fist there, but it's very light touch. It only applies to very specific things. So they basically, if in anarchy everyone's 100% free, which turns into a bunch of bullies and warlords, and now no one's free. The Enlightenment was like, okay, if we have everyone be 80% free, but that last 20% no one can do, then we think that not only will people be able to now live freely and safely, but also it'll foster all this productivity, all this natural competition. With rules, the competition will flourish. And this, to me, is no different than a human creating a little group to do a diet with, right? This is a mass scale structure that is basically that the rational parts of our brain can create, that can say, if we just live within this structure, our worst instincts can't take over.
Okay, this is really complex and very nuanced, but I think incredibly important. And the reason that I wanted to talk to you and that I found your book so compelling is all of this stuff really matters. So I came to studying history very late, but the more I study history, the more I realize that the way that the society functions matters a lot. And meaning life and death, quality of life, being just tormented endlessly, or having something that is a pretty amazing place to be. So there are 3 books that I would encourage people to read if they really want to get a sense of what humans are capable of in the wrong direction. And that would be Mao the Unknown Story, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, and The Gulag Archipelago. Those are very terrifying books about what happens when the baser instincts go awry. And so when I think about, okay, how does this end up happening? Let me know what you think about this thesis. Hypothesis may be more accurate. So humans have just a need for certainty. And when I'm teaching entrepreneurs, one of the things I teach them is you have to be able to intoxicate your team with certainty. And if you say, hey, this is the way forward, of course, you're never going to know for sure, but you have to put out, this is what I think we have to do to accomplish this goal. You've got to tell them, this is it. We're going to go do this thing. Now, privately, you can have all the doubt in the world, but you need to have certainty to get them marching in a direction, which is why, going back to your idea of why this feels so good, is that for humans have an innate desire for progress. I think that's just in terms of the primitive mind, is just hardwired into us, which is what keeps us out there foraging and hunting and pushing. And if that didn't feel good, to your point about the dog's brain is actually what's giving it the treat, the dopamine reward. If doing hard things in the pursuit of progress didn't feel awesome, then we would never have become the most dominant apex predator the world has ever seen. So you have this innate push for progress, and you have this crushing need for certainty. And so you have people that can rise up by giving you that certainty. And being nuanced is incredibly difficult. It takes, as somebody who often struggles to hold very nuanced ideas, I think one of the markers of a high level of intelligence is that ability to really find a nuanced path through something. Now, having grown up in America, I'm immersed in this American experiment. So I never really realized that it was an experiment, that it's fragile and that it could be lost. And that when you look at a tyrannical government where certainty is ruling the day, one person is just telling you, you're going to go do this, and people can get behind it because they just, hey, I followed the rules and that's that, even though it can be horrendous tyranny. And that when I think of things like the woke mind virus, which seems to be really capturing people today, part of it is it sounds great, even though it may not be working. Part of it is that it gives people certainty on how to move. And then part of it is that finding the nuance of, even though it sounds good, it's not working. They're using names that you would never want to push back against, but the underlying idea may not be quite aligned. All of that gets very murky and very hard to navigate through. And so people end up getting pressured to be silent. They don't understand their own view because they're not able to talk out loud about it. They're not able to clarify their own view. And so they're never able to think through the problem well, to define that nuanced view, and then to move forward with certainty and nuance. So it feels like a system that is very easy to get wrong and very difficult to get right. And so as when you were writing the book, and you called it a self-help book for our societies, talk us through this idea of the ladder so that people can understand how to think through these nuanced positions in a way without falling prey to just whatever's the popular narrative.
Well, so we talk a lot about horizontal spectrums. We've got political, you've got the left, the far left, and the center, and the right, and the far right, right? So it's this one-dimensional horizontal axis. And we have a lot of those. On any spectrum of opinion, you could just lay out the opinion of this extreme, that extreme, and then the things in the middle. And that's all what you think, right? Which is great. But I was like, well, let's build another axis, a vertical one that can be a how you think axis. So we can just talk about it. It's an important concept that people know, but let's give it an axis. So I call it the ladder. And when it comes to thinking, it's just defined pretty simply, where at the top, you care about truth. That's what you're acting the way someone acts when they care most about truth. And at the very bottom, what you only care about is confirming your existing beliefs. And then, of course, it's a spectrum. So you can have multiple rungs on that ladder. And it's not that some people are the low rung people. It's that we all have the tendency to kind of go up and down on this ladder, depending on the day, on our mood, on the stage in our life, on the topic. But once you're thinking about this as an actual axis that you can be on, a ladder, then I think it helps you realize, okay, wait, I'm doing that thing where I'm trying to confirm my beliefs, and I'm actually not going for truth deep down, and you can be more self-aware. So what does someone act like when truth is their motive, truly, right? I mean, if you think about this, if you just take it out of the realm of politics or religion or one of these really, sensitive topics, and you just, you're trying to figure out how to fix something. You have a bunch of tools and you're trying to fix a machine that's not working, and you have people around. And if you're saying, I have a theory here that actually what we need to cut the red wire, and we need to put another metal plate here. And someone else says, No. You got to leave the red wire and cut the green wire, right? You're not gonna say you're an awful person because like you're the kind of person who thinks the green wire type people, right? You're not. No, why would you ever? That's crazy. You would just what you'd be doing is you try to assess, well, just fully, without any bias. Like you're trying to assess, does this person know what they're talking about, right? Is this person just someone who just out of nowhere says, I don't like the green wire? Or, you'd ask their background and they'd say, oh, and you'd hear them talk and you'd say, oh, this person actually seems like they have a lot more experience here than I do, or they understand this kind of machine better. Okay, so I'm going to listen to them and I'm going to update my beliefs. I was so certain about the red wire and, the fact that they think it's the green wire makes me reconsider whether I know. This is just normal human thinking because all you care about is which wire should I actually be cutting on this thing. So when it comes to if you truly or if you're on that's kind of top rung thinking, if you're thinking that way with your political beliefs or any other belief, you'd have this belief. And you would be so open to dissent and to challenge. You'd seek out articles that are disagreeing with you because you're thinking that, you can think of your belief as a little machine and you're trying to see if it's as strong as a machine as possible. You collected all these little information puzzle pieces and you've assembled them together into a hypothesis. And you know that people have blind spots and people are biased and people make mistakes. And so this machine probably has some flaws. How am I going to find out what they are? I'm going to go out and test it. I'm going to find people who disagree with it and say, kick the machine. See if you can break it, right? Which of course is a debate or an argument. And you're going to go read things that disagree with you. You're going to read people that say, that this is built wrong. And if someone makes a good point and you say, oh, you know what? Like the machine's not standing up well to your dissent. You're not going to be offended or angry at that person or cut them out of your life. You're going to say, great, I need to update or I need to reconsider that, right? Okay, so this is obviously like ideal thinking, right? And if we always thought this way, when you're thinking that way, you are a hyper efficient learner, right? If your motive is truth and you act that way, you behave that way, you're going to be the best at finding the truth eventually. You're going to have a natural humility, and you're also going to end up with a lot of nuance because the truth is so often nuanced. So you're going to be open to that, and you're going to end up refining your belief, and now your machine gets a little bit sharper, and your idea gets a little bit better, and now you get more information, you read more, you test your idea more, and the machine gets a little bit better, and eventually you're going to have this very complex and nuanced point of view that is you worked really hard for, and it's going to be nuanced, and it's going to be the best chance you have of being accurate. Now, that would be nice if we all thought that way. But of course, there's this primitive mind that we talked about, which is this part of your brain that is not wired for truth. It's wired for survival in 50,000 BC. And what that often meant was agreeing with the sacred beliefs of your tribe and believing them. And the people who could believe what the tribe believed with full conviction, they survived well. They were on the in group. They fit in, and that's what was needed.
What's up, guys? It's Tom Bilyeu, and if you're anything like me, you're always looking for ways to level up your mindset, your business, and your life in general. That's exactly why I started Impact Theory, a podcast that brings together the world's most successful and inspiring people to share their stories and, most importantly, strategies for success. And now it's easier than ever to listen to Impact Theory on Amazon Music. Whether you're on the go or chilling at home, you can simply open up the Amazon Music app and search for Impact Theory with Tom Bilyeu to start listening right away. If you really want to take things to the next level, just ask Alexa. Hey Alexa, play Impact Theory with Tom Bilyeu on Amazon Music.
Now playing Impact Theory with Tom Bilyeu on Amazon Music.
And boom, you're instantly plugged into the latest and greatest conversations on mindset, health, finances, and entrepreneurship. Get inspired, get motivated, and be legendary with Impact Theory on Amazon Music. Let's do this.
So this other part of our brain very much identifies with certain ideas. And when you identify with an idea, your brain has a tough time telling the difference between a sacred belief and your identity and your body. And so it's actually a lot of research where in fMRI experiments, people's fight or flight parts of their brain light up when certain beliefs like political are challenged. It actually lights those things up. And when people have those parts of their brain being lit up by this challenge, they are extremely unlikely to change their mind.
Because they feel attacked?
Yeah, it's literally lighting up a different part of your brain when political beliefs are challenged so this is a specific study I'm thinking of from 2016. And, there were like 10 non-political beliefs that were challenged, and then 10 of the participants' political beliefs. And the non-political beliefs were much more likely to light up kind of the prefrontal cortex, like, rational centers of the brain. And the political beliefs were much more, when those were challenged, the limbic system, the more primitive emotional, parts, the amygdala, the fear centers, the fight or flight parts of our brain lit up, and the default mode network, which is a set of brain regions that are associated with internal, introspection and, reflecting inwardly as opposed to listening to what someone's saying on the outside. And so when the political beliefs were challenged, minds didn't change. And when the non-political beliefs were challenged, there was much more movement in the person saying, oh, I guess I was wrong. So it's that the natural or the logical kind of way to think would be, as I said, obviously, why would you not want truth? Everyone should want that. Why would you want to be delusional? And that is what we're like most of the time. But then these certain areas, like politics, will trigger a crazy part of our brain that treats ideas and people as one and the same. It feels,
So it's my identity.
yeah, feels angry and hurt and offended when someone disagrees with them, and it gets really riled up and gets, you can feel that emotion. You're really hyped up and you kind of hate that person maybe, and maybe even you cut them out of your life. And I can only be friends with people who agree with me on these topics. And that is madness. That is a totally weird thing going on in the brain. And so that to me is what I would call low rung thinking is when, and so when someone's, if someone's motivated by truth, we said what they did. They'll seek out dissent. They'll change their mind, right? They want more information. They're humble. When they're on the low rungs, and you're thinking a whole different way, and you're deep down, even if you don't know it at that moment, your deep down motivation is to confirm what you believe, to continue to feel strongly about it, and to talk about how right I am and how wrong and bad those other people are who disagree with me. You're going to behave in a way that serves that motivation. So that's confirmation bias and cherry picking evidence that fits in all these cognitive, fallacies that come up, and these biases. Those are all ways that your brain can make sure you continue to believe the things that you believe in the face of information that might be compelling, that says you're wrong. Doesn't matter. You will become a brick wall when it comes to those beliefs. And we all do this. And it's good to note when I'm, if you can't, the good litmus test is if you believe something really strongly, ask yourself, is there anything someone could present me right now? Is there, in this argument, is there anything this person could say that would make me say, you know what? I think I'm wrong. I need to rethink that. And if the answer is no, of course not. Every time they're talking, I'm just waiting so I can, then you're down in the low rungs. And that's okay. We all do it. But it's a reminder. Calm down. Remember that you and your ideas are not the same. Be humble, accept that you might be wrong, and listen, and maybe you'll learn something. And remember, truth matters more than being right. And you have to continually remind yourself of this.
Why does truth matter?
Because when we have a more accurate picture of the world, we can do more for the world. When we have a more accurate picture of reality, we live better lives. We end up with fewer regrets. When you're thinking that way, you tend not to be in a tribal mindset. You feel love for all humans. You don't feel this weird difference in empathy between the us group and the them group. You're your best self when you're in that mode. When if you're seeking truth and you're remembering that truth is hard, it's going to bring this humility in, and you're going to end up with a clearer view of the world, but you're also going to learn a lot more. Think of what is learning. Learning is getting your perception closer to reality, right? And so you're going to do that, and you're going to learn, and so you're going to end up knowing a lot more. You can make better decisions. You're going to end up with more wisdom down the road. You're I think morally kind of a better person. And the alternative is delusion. Delusion that feels good in the moment, just like eating Skittles feels good in the moment, but actually makes you you're not in touch with reality. And I think over the long run, I don't think that's good for. I mean, maybe you could argue that some people are happy not knowing the truth, and maybe it's better that way. But I don't think most people would say that about themselves. And if someone wants to say, you know what, I don't want to know the truth, then okay, I would say then. But I think if 99 out of 100 people would say, I want the truth and I know the truth, and they think they know the truth. So it's not that they actively are saying, I don't care about the truth.
You sure about that? So I've even heard you talk about this. So I guess one, let me acknowledge, the only part of your answer that surprised me was the moral thing. So I'll follow up on
Yeah.
that in a minute. But I think you're bang on, especially with the idea of identity. People end up getting tied up in that. But I've heard you say that when it comes to being right, when it comes to people trying to get to the truth, that some people are saying, no, like truth is just a power game. And even this idea that there is something right or something better than another thing is just a structure, in essence, of oppression. So when you said that, I think everybody wants the truth, is that true?
Well, you're talking about, I was probably referring to a very specific ideology, kind of this postmodern line of thought, which says there is no such thing as objective truth, and that everyone that everyone has their truth. So that's a very specific kind of far left kind of radical line of thought, which I think
Don't
is
you
actually.
think this is? Sorry, finish that because that sounds very interesting.
No, I was saying I think it's perfectly interesting, the concept that when you live a life as person A versus person B, you have total different subjective experiences.
Yes.
I think that's interesting.
Interesting.
But I fully believe in an objective truth. It doesn't mean just because there's subjective experience doesn't mean there's not also objective truth. It doesn't mean that we're always good at finding it. But the whole birth of the scientific method, right? What is science? It's a process that anyone in the world, from any country, any language, any age, any religion or race, can participate in together. It's this giant global project that is just a method. It's a way of thinking, and it's a method for getting closer to the objective truth. So I'm not a postmodernist. So I would say, I know that some people, as far as whether they'd say we don't care about truth, I don't think that's what they think. They think that each person kind of has their own truth. And
but doesn't that mean by definition that there is no objective truth? And we're getting now to where I think this starts to derange. And again, for anybody listening, I just want to remind you, I worry about this going off the rails. Totalitarianism, genocide, like it gets scary fast. I'll point out the 3 books I mentioned at the top. Like humans have a long history of killing a lot of people in the name of ideology. So this really feels like it's important to get right. It does seem like by definition, people that say that there is no objective truth and that's just a big part of the power game, that they are actively rejecting that idea.
And I think they're wrong. I think that but they're not saying we want to be delusional. They're saying that, in this case, when you're talking about, kind of the woke movement, what they're saying is that privileged people don't have access to the full truth, but oppressed people do. Because oppressed people know the dominant narrative, which is the privileged narrative, because everyone knows that, but they also know the oppressed experience, which only they have access to. To me, that's not true. I think that of course, oppressed people have access to information but everyone is an individual and everyone has a ton of access to specific life experiences. And this kind of binary, people with that skin color don't have the full truth, but people, that to me is just, it's rigid and childish kind of.
What do they mean when they say truth? That I actually don't understand. And you threw out a definition earlier that I think is pretty close to mine, but before I offer mine, when people say the truth, when postmodernists say the truth, what do they mean?
Well, I would say, and I don't want to speak for people who I'm not one of them, so I'll do the best I can. But, there's this thing called standpoint theory, right? Which is the idea that I was just kind of referring to, which is that people are positioned in the matrix of oppression. And that there's a kind of a current going on, like we're all in a river together. And that's the dominant narrative. And that's kind of the forces of oppression. And people who benefit from that, which they would say in other Marxist places, they might say they're the ruling class. In the US, in today's kind of woke movement, they would say the straight white men. They are always swimming with the current. And so everyone knows what the current is like because we're all stuck in it, but they don't have any idea of what it's like to go against the current. And so people who are not straight white men they have a totally different experience of reality. They actually have more information, and what they say counts more because they actually have access to
What they
this.
say about what?
What they say about their worldview. It doesn't. So to me, what this actually is a way that when there's a statistic or a set of data or an argument that comes out that disagrees with this ideology, to me, it's a convenient way to say that's all a part of the dominant narrative. In fact, science itself, the scientific method, was invented by white men, which, by the way, is not true. It's like that's part of my, it's like it's such a it gives no credence to cultures all around the world who created the scientific method together and have they get all this credit for something like science to white Western men. By saying that this is a tool created by white Western men to entrench kind of their own power. And again, I'm saying what I'm trying to steel man what I think they would say. I completely disagree with this entirely. I think that science does not have a color, and I think science is a way of thinking, and it is the best known method, in my view, of finding the truth, of getting closer to it. Now, you can ask, what is truth? It's just that there is the fact that there is also subjective experience, which each person kind of has their own, doesn't mean that's part of objective truth. Objective truth is just reality. So, the Earth weighs this many kilograms, and the gravity here is this strong, and it's going around the sun, and it's been doing that for this long. And humans evolved this way, and our brain works this way because of it. These are really hard questions, but to me, there is an answer here. It's just that humans takes a long time for us to get closer to it. Some of the things, like the diameter of the Earth, we got that one. For a long time, they had no idea, and there were different theories. Now we know it. It's a clear answer. We have the answer. We know the mass of the Earth. We understand some of how gravity works. But when it comes to, evolution and why where our memories are in our brains, and we don't know. But it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It does exist. So to me, I think look. If you go to you talk about Mao. One of the things that in the Maoist revolutions, they were very hostile, the radicals, to science. They would say the intellectuals and the scientists, they are a part of our oppression, right? To me, you show me a movement that is hostile to science and the notion of objective truth, that is also humane and productive over the long period of time, and I will be surprised, because I've never seen one. To me, when a movement is hostile to the idea of objective truth and science, and and almost always goes along with the good people, the good oppressed people, and the bad privileged people, right? It's or whatever. Maybe it's the other way around. Maybe it's like Hitler. It's the good upper inner people and the bad outsider scum. Whatever it is. Anytime someone's doing this moral dualism and they're anti-science, to me, that is just human primitive minds have ganged up together into kind of a religious movement that is, masked in a certain kind of righteous politics, and that it's actually almost always going to lead to really, really bad things, a destruction and suffering, and it almost never ends up serving the people the movement supposedly is supposed to. The Nazis were supposed to serve the patriotic German, and the Maoists were supposed to serve the people, right, and make it give people a better life, and the woke movement is supposed to serve Black Americans and women. And to me, in all these cases, I feel like those are some of the people that are hurt most by these movements. So, yeah,
dude. So this is really, really important. So I'm going to define what I think truth is, and then answer why I think if you want to be a good totalitarian top-down movement, you have to find a way to bury science. So the truth is, from where I'm sitting, the human mind is a prediction machine, and the truth is the thing that, as you get closer to it, allows you to better predict the outcome of your behaviors. So take Newtonian physics. So Newtonian physics got us a lot closer to the truth, and we were able to realize, oh, wait, the Earth is revolving around the sun. This is roughly how gravity works. We were able to predict the motion of large bodies. Very, very helpful. And I think we could land on the moon without Einsteinian physics. I'm almost certain that's true. So it's like, hey, pretty impressive. But then without general relativity and special relativity, we would not be able to do things like GPS. We certainly wouldn't be able to do nuclear physics. And so as we got closer to the truth there, we were able to unleash the power of the atom. And so it's like, hey, we got closer to that. We're better able to predict the outcome of our behaviors and thusly unleash tremendous power, tremendous progress. And so truth in that sense becomes very useful. So even when you think about things like the social sciences, okay, you make a prediction. We're going to put in this this new law, whatever, and we expect X outcome. Now, if we get a different outcome than that, then there was something flawed in our thinking. We were farther from the truth than we thought we were. But if we're willing to look at the results, we can actually get closer to the truth. We can structure something even better. And now next time when we run a new experiment, it's going to be hopefully getting us closer to the result that we wanted. So the reason that I think that in a totalitarian movement, which I will say that there are shades of that, anytime where you don't allow a dissenting voice, you're headed down the path of totalitarianism. And I see that very much with woke thinking. So the reason that you would have to eschew science or anything else is you need a narrative to give people the certainty to move forward and to take action. The problem with science, that pesky thing, is it tells you whether you're close to the truth or not because you can accurately predict the outcome of your behaviors. So if you're telling people, hey, here's the narrative, do these things and life will be better for everybody. And then you do those things and life isn't better for people, or it isn't better for the people that you said it was going to be better for, it breaks the narrative. Yeah. So now it's like, oh, the very thing that I'm using to intoxicate people with certainty falls apart under the scrutiny of reality. But if I can say, oh, that test that you're going to use to see if this was effective or not, that is so flawed, you can't even do that. Shame on you for even bringing it up. And that's, bad, racist, whatever. Now you can keep the narrative intact. Now you can maintain power. And that's where this starts to break down for me. I cannot, until I started reading Nietzsche and the idea of the will to power, I could not understand why people would want a worldview that was obviously broken. Like, what are you getting out of it? You're not making progress. You're not getting anything better. Like, I like refrigerators and air conditioning and the internet. Like, these are amazing things. And none of them are possible when you start saying, no, 2 + 2 isn't really 4. Like, what is happening?
Yeah. I think of it as, why do people do what they do, right? Because they have a worldview where they believe that the rewards are here and the penalties are here, and this is what's good, and this is what good people do and bad people do, and I want to be good, and so then behavior gets driven, right? You take the same human nature, and you give it a.
But do you think that's where it starts? That doesn't feel like the first moment. That feels like how you get the second person into this, but it doesn't feel like the first person.
But that's what I'm saying is, if you can author the story that people believe, you're all powerful. You can play God. If I can convince a ton of people that I speak to God, so I know, no one else, but I know what's going to get you into heaven, which is the ultimate primal incentive. And by the way, you might have a lot of sex with virgins there, which is another huge primal incentive, and everything you could ever want, and eternal life, and everything you're primarily scared of. Heaven solves it. I know how to get you there. And by the way, I also know what's going to get you sent to hell. And now, because if they can believe that I know, I have the answer. Now I can start saying, okay, here's what gets you into heaven. All the things that I want you to do. And you can drive the populace like a remote control car. And right. And so if you take any kind of tyrant, they're always doing some version of that where they have a story. And if they can make that the story people believe, look at North Korea, right? I went to North Korea for 5 days.
Whoa.
And
when?
2013.
Why?
It's fascinating.
Why
not?
You afraid?
No, I was afraid. I probably should have been more afraid given that now they've started arresting some of the people on this same tour guide.
No thanks.
But it was so interesting because what I was immersed in for 5 days was the North Korean story. And it goes like this. The Korean War, which we think of as something that was from 1950 to 1953 and is over, in South Korea, I think they would say the same thing. That happened, and now we're the 15th biggest economy, one of the big boys in the world. In North Korea, the story is that war is ongoing, still going, that the South, our poor cousins in the South, they don't hate South Koreans, our poor cousins down there are being occupied currently by the evil imperialist Americans. They use that term a lot of times, the imperialist Americans. They are occupying half our country, and the South wishes they could be free. And the only reason that we're free is because our great leaders, our brave leaders in our military, are so powerful that the U.S. can't get here. They want to take over here too, but they can't, and they're scared of us. And that's why we get to be free people. But people down in the South, they're not free. That is a story that is very far from the truth. So what happens? What were we told? We were told before we went in, I Had Nothing to Envy, which is a book about, a North Korean defector. You cannot bring that into the country, they said. And they're saying the worst thing you could ever bring was like a radio that had South Korean stations. Because if people there knew that Seoul was not an oppressed place, but actually a thriving metropolis with people who are well-fed and free and living their best lives, it would be a disaster, right? And so they have this story, and some people believe it in the country, a lot of people do, and the people who don't know to keep quiet. And so if you can control speech, you can control what people believe. And if you control what people believe, you can keep them acting the way you want, which is subservient to the dear leaders and worshiping the leaders and being conforming to all of that. If so, you are incredibly hostile to truth because you want to overpower people, and you want to basically have people like marionettes and doing what you want. And so you can't. The truth would never work if that were the. So they every single measure in that country is, of course, there's no internet, right? There's so much effort put towards suppressing the truth, and that's always the case because if you can write the story that people believe, you drive their behavior. If you stop being able to do that, you can't. Now, what science is. The reason science is great is because what science says is put away all the stories. There is a big story, a real story called objective truth, and we don't claim to know it. Science has theories. They max out at theory because they say science is skeptical of its own conclusions, and it assumes. No scientist said, "Oh my God, science is broken because Newton's laws weren't the complete thing." They say, "Great, right?" Science says, "Yes, let's be less wrong every year. Let's be a little less wrong." So science is saying there is a story that's real, and we're just working together humbly, collaboratively on trying to get closer to it, which is so different. So again, when something's hostile to science, they're almost always hostile to free speech as well. And they almost always are the kind of people that can't stand up in a real debate. They don't actually have actual evidence on their side. So if you can't hang in a debate, what you do is you say debate is evil. And these are dangerous ideas that cannot be platformed. And if you platform them, we're going to punish you because you're allowing dangerous, harmful ideas to spread, which is harming marginalized people, right? It's just the oldest trick in the book. There's 100 versions of this, and it's always the same thing. It's just authoritarianism for the sake of controlling people.
Yeah. Okay. So we still have the will to power sort of hanging out there. But for a second, I want to go back to identity. This idea that people end up tying their identity to a set of ideas. And when that gets attacked, the regions of the brain light up that have to do with, whoa, you're attacking me. It seems to me that the only way out of this trap, and that you can literally draw a line in the sand in my life of before this realization and after. So I used to value myself for being smart. That was leading me down very weird paths because I would say I'm sort of middle of the road. I'm fine. I can get by. But I am not going to be celebrated necessarily for one of the great intellects of all time. And so I realized that by valuing myself for being smart, anything that attacked that notion was just, I could not have it. And so I had to switch what I built my identity around to being that of the learner. And once I switched my identity to, I don't mind being told that I'm wrong. I don't mind realizing that I don't have the right answer. I don't mind whatever. Just like, hey, if it's true, meaning if I act as if that thing is true, I can better predict the outcome of my behaviors. I'm going to adopt that. And so it became about building my ego around my willingness to stare nakedly at my inadequacies. And so that like just radically changed my life. I don't see another way out of this. I think everybody, like if you want to make your life better, that's the only answer. The only answer, like you need an ego, you need self-esteem, you need to feel good about who you are, you need a sense of identity, you need to be able to say who you are and like what value system you live by. Is there another way, or is that the one?
Well, what you're really talking about is you're taking a backpack that is heavy with rock size, with rocks that are this description of your identity and these characteristics you pride yourself on, and the things you feel certain about and that you need to make sure everyone knows you're so smart about. And all these labels you put on yourself, right? Those are all rocks that weigh down the backpack. It's heavy. What you're talking about is the magical hack of putting down the backpack and saying, actually, I'm just a learner, like you said, or some humble thing. I'm just an individual who's complicated, who evolves, and I'm just that awareness inside of the individual. And I'm going to try to get less wrong throughout my life. And I'm going to be wrong a lot, though. And I'm going to evolve, and I might be into this kind of stuff this year, and then I'll change my mind next year. I'm not part of any tribe or group necessarily, unless it's in like kind of a fun way where I'm not taking it very seriously. It's liberating, right? And you're light suddenly, and now you're free you can start skipping around, learning stuff and exploring stuff and trying things. People will also like you more because you just come off more humble. It makes you seem wiser, and your ego is not getting threatened when so many different things happen, right? You're not a little petty person. So yes, but this is very hard. And you talked about meaning and identity and purpose and connection and all these things that we need. And one of my main problems with movements, a lot of certain political movements, is the ones that, and then this is no different than cults and other things, when they tell you all your answers are here. You come and join our thing and you have meaning and you have purpose and you have identity and you have righteousness and you have connection and you have a community. You know who you are now because now you are a blankist, you're whatever it is. And when you come here, all of those holes that are so painful and so hard to fill, it's like a get-rich-quick scheme. Come here, and you got it, and you have all those things. Just join our army. Of course, it's snake oil. It's a trap because those things are hard, and they emerge from deep, unique individualism that happens over long periods of time. You start to figure out meaning for yourself. You start to figure out, your purpose and what you really care about and what you really believe, right? One of the things these movements promise you is a full setup, ready to go, one-stop shop for all strong opinions. Now you know what every political issue you have, every moral thing, it's easy now. You have your answer. This is what the good people think. This is what the bad people think. Memorize the checklist and you're good to go. Read these core op-eds that we all pass around, and you know how to say all the right arguments. And so to me, what those things are doing is they're not actually filling any of those holes. They're just a kind of a sleazy get-rich-quick scheme that lures in vulnerable people. These are it's never bad people joining these things or believing these things. It's all often these things prey on people's empathy or their desire for connection or these human things. But to me, it's very it's no different than kind of an abusive cult in a lot of ways. And I think that what the wise thing to teach people, especially vulnerable people, is that you feel so bad about yourself for not knowing your meaning and not having strong opinions and not knowing what you think about all this. But actually, that's okay. No one really, most people don't know, and that's okay. And because none of that is who you are. You're really this internal awareness, and you're free to be any of these things. That's what I would want to tell people, as opposed to saying, in a certain mentality, if you don't have strong opinions on everything, you sound like an idiot, right? And I would say, no, that is not correct, right? It's that the people who have unearned conviction about everything, they're blowhards, and they don't actually, their egos are just going buck wild. So I feel like it's the exact opposite advice, and I feel like somewhere along the way you got a much better message, or you learned a much better message because, and I can say it's better because it's just, I think it's more realistic, and it is. It's as I said, it's liberating.
Yeah, it's interesting. For me, it was getting kicked in the face by some things I did worked and other things I didn't. And I realized that I was arguing for ideas that made me feel the way I wanted to feel, but I knew that they weren't going to work in a business context. And I don't know if without the marketplace saying, hey, we actually will buy this, we'll pay money for this thing, we're not going to pay money for that thing. If I didn't have that just brutal objective clarity of, ooh, one course of action, I go out of business, the other course of action, I thrive, is very sobering. And that forced me to realize, okay, if I argue for this idea because it makes me feel smart, or you're going to think I'm smart if I can convince you, but the market won't be swayed. I don't know if I ever would have gotten there. And so I see, I mean, this goes back to something I already said, but I see really well-intentioned people get lost in the sequence of every answer is going to be nuanced. Nuance is very hard if you can't talk out loud. If there are certain ideas that are just off the table and you're not allowed to have them, then you're not going to talk out loud, which means that you're never going to go from wrong to right. And so you're just going to run down the checklist of, I want to please my tribe and fit in and not be ostracized, which is leveraging the primitive mind against me. And this is where we end up. And so I'm really unnerved. I'm worried about the idea that you put it in your book, but you use different words. The classic being hard times make strong men make good times make weak men make hard times. And so you go in this loop. And in the book, you say, can we not just skip the hard times part? I worry that we can't.
Yeah, and well, and it's especially scary because, and so I reframed it just because it's not quite, I just don't think that, what is a hard man, a weak man, or whatever it is, sorry, it's a strong. And to me, it was like, what it really is to me is it's wise people create good times. Wise meaning people who see how bad things can get. They've usually because they've experienced it themselves, and they don't take anything for granted, and they work really hard with humility and collaboration to because they know how important it is to build systems that create good times. When people have lived in good times for a few generations, they don't find them precious, and they don't thank their stars every morning for, oh my God, I get to wake up in good times. They just think this is how things are. In fact, actually things suck, and they start to, you calibrate. This is no different than a human. If human is X amount of money, and they just dream of having 10x, and they get 10x, they suddenly have all these complaints about not having 100x, right? So it's the same thing. You get good times for too long, you stop appreciating it, and instead of all the kids learning civics and saying, well, okay, we have to all work together to keep good times, they say good times are just how things are, or whatever these times are. This is just how things are. And they stop teaching kids civics, and people start doing all the things that actually create bad times, and loosening all of this really well thought out structure starts, all the different support beams start to weaken. So that's why I go from, wise people create good times for too long creates foolish people. And foolish people eventually will drive you right into bad times. And, bad times is, whatever, civilizational collapse. It's happened many, many, many times before. Mm-hmm. Or just some awful, unwise war, whatever it is. And then hundreds of millions of people die. So for those people, that's the end of the cycle. But in the rubble, a couple decades later, wise people emerge. And an excruciating process that usually the people who experience bad times aren't even around anymore. Their grandkids can be back in good times, right? So this is this cycle. And the reason that it's so scary right now is, bad times, if you read history, it's wow, it's a lot of bad times. And they'll say things. And I'm like, that sounds awful, like terrifying. Like there's a lot of like actual King Joffreys out there, and like slavery, like rampant slavery all over the place for thousands of years. And it's like, imagine how awful that is. And like rape and just complete massive injustice and crushing poverty, right? And so you think about how awful this is. But in some ways, what's weird is that the 20th century was, the best yet in so many metrics. You have the best GDP per capita, life expectancy is just skyrockets around the world. Medical technology, extreme poverty is at its lowest ever. And so you have this incredible prosperity. In that same century, when things did go badly, they went really badly. You had the biggest genocides ever. You had the biggest wars ever. You had suddenly a new thing, which is complete existential threats, existential risks like nukes, right? You didn't have an existential threat in the 1700s. There was nothing that might have killed all of humanity that we did with our own foolishness, right? You didn't have that much power as a species. So suddenly in the 20th century, we're developing these giant magic wands that we can suddenly shoot at things and we might just kill ourselves. So the 20th century was the best ever and also in some ways the most vulnerable and scariest ever with the biggest tragedies. So now apply that to the next century. It's just even more. We're going to have even better prosperity. Life expectancy is continuing to go up. You're going to completely eradicate disease and poverty, and it's going to be amazing, genuinely amazing, except if this goes wrong, when things go bad, if we sink to bad times on that merry-go-round in the 21st century, with all the power we have and all the many different kinds of existential risks we have, nukes is just one of them now. It could be the worst ever. We should be really scared. The stakes get higher as tech gets more exponential. The good times get better, but the bad times get worse. And right now, since we're just living in objectively pretty overall good times, people are not scared enough of bad times. They just take it for granted. It's just human nature. I do it. As soon as I finish this conversation, I'll go back on with my life and stop feeling scared because I grew up this way and my parents grew up this way. And we have a good life and that life is good and everything ends up fine. And that's wrong. We should not be thinking that way. We should be scared and we should be working really hard to teach kids civics and to say, how can we be wise together and uphold this kind of liberal democracy?
So what are the things that lead to bad times? Can they be described? Like I would say the second you talk about ending freedom of speech, you're on a one-way street to bad times. So what make bad times, and then we'll get to what make good times.
Yeah, well, the Enlightenment was...
Can you define then what the Enlightenment was?
Yeah,
exactly.
So the Enlightenment was a period of intense... I mean, it's funny because one of the theories is that that coffee shops started sprouting up. And all these smart people who would normally have been in saloons singing songs and punching each other and playing games were suddenly in coffee shops, dead sober, caffeinated, and debating. And then they were going to write books about their debates. And there was, and so it was actually like a time when all of this philosophy blossomed and people would going back to Greek philosophy and saying, what have we learned? And what's the, there's been so much trial and error with Christianity and with democracy and all these things that have gone on. So what did we learn? How should people live? And it's kind of the latest crack that at least the Western world came up with on what's right and wrong for how people should live. What's the most effective and practical, but also the moral way that governments should, how governments should work. And so the application of that was, the U.S. was kind of the first one, and now of course hundreds of, over 100 countries have now put that into practice, which is building actual countries based on that philosophy. So it was a lot of talk, and suddenly it was being put into use. And the U.S. had a unique opportunity because they didn't have the baggage. It was for a blank slate. They could say, we can start from scratch. It was much harder to do that in Europe and other places. And so there were things like free speech, right, which was one of the major insights of this, which is that free speech is basically the foundational right on which every other right is based. Now, if you think about what's the alternative to free speech, it's always the same. It's the people with the most power, whether it's cultural or government or physical, violence. The people with the most power decide what's offensive, what's okay to say, what's not. And almost always, if it's a king, it's a lot of dictators out there right now who are imposing censorship, and none of them are saying, I impose censorship. They're saying, I'm against hate speech. I'm against, we are against blasphemy, right? Everyone frames it nicely. But what
do you think then hate speech and blasphemy are a part of what leads to good times?
But I think free speech is what leads to good times, and 100 people define hate speech and blasphemy 100 different ways. I think things being said in a free speech environment, which some people will find to be hateful or blasphemic, is inevitable. So the alternative is you say, okay, actually hate speech is banned. Again, 100 people have 100 different definitions of hate speech. So what's actually banned? It's that the powerful people determine to be hate speech. In the case of a dictator, it almost always happens to be criticism of the government. non-patriotic speech, or if it's a religious dictatorship, blasphemy against God or whatever. It is almost always, if the alternative to free speech sucks in a lot of ways, you're going to have a lot of shitty people saying shitty things, and some of those things are going to hurt when they're said, and some of those things are going to cause harm, and they are. But the alternative is authoritarianism, because someone has to lay down the law of what constitutes hate speech, and it's always the powerful people deciding what is inconvenient to their goals is what this becomes not allowed. So it's when you think about it that way, you realize that free speech is the only thing that you can have, or otherwise you're just back in tyranny. And so then another huge one, of course, was the voting system, right? There's been democracy forever, but specific modern version of this very complex big country, republic democracy, that is an insight. That is built on centuries of trial and error experiments still, and it's incredibly flawed, right? And who thinks the U.S. government system is great? I mean, it's awful in so many ways, and it often doesn't represent the will of the people, and it's open to corruption, and it's like everything else. But what's the alternative, right? I mean, it's you just have to always think like this is the kind of the theme with Enlightenment governments is it's the least bad outcome. So what's a threat to this? What creates bad times? If I consider the liberalism like a house that we live in, lowercase l liberalism, right? Like Enlightenment style, like classic liberalism, I consider it a house that we all in the US are living inside of. Whether you're left, right, or center politically, we are all, in the liberal house, living under its rules and benefiting from its benefits. And it has it values the individual, and it says that, everyone is, life, liberty, and property, or pursuit of happiness, and that equality of opportunity is at least the goal. Of course, we can argue about how well it's being achieved, but it's kind of it's a set of ideas that most Americans, left, right, and center, say, yeah, well, that's good. We just need to achieve it better, right? So to me, that house is one of the main things that creates good times, and that has created modern good times. It is we owe our good times to that house. That house has kept people most of the time, most people reasonably free, has engendered prosperity, and has again fostered at least the best crack at fairness that probably we've seen. Even of course, there's been lots of unfair things. Jim Crow. I mean, we failed at the liberal house a few times, but the liberal house itself is mostly made good times. Now, what creates bad times is the house, the support beam starting to decay and crack, and so an example of that. This is why we talk a lot about wokeness, but the MAGA movement. I mean, what I see with Trump, there's a lot of things you could criticize Trump for, but like the election stuff is, to me, if you're thinking about it, this is a liberal house, when he said before the 2016 and 2020 election, before them, he declared, I will accept the results if I win. Then this person wins and then doesn't win. And when the person doesn't win, literally tries to say the election is rigged. That is a mind virus of its own. You talk about the woke mind virus. That is a mind virus. It's a mind virus which says whenever my candidate doesn't win, it must be rigged. And that is a support beam. That is right there in front of you, the decay of a support beam. Because what is the support?
What would you call that support beam?
The support beam is, so it's not just the system of kind of democratically elected leaders, because Russia claims to have that. It's the widespread trust that we actually have democratic leaders. It's trust in the system so that we all can agree, my candidate lost, but it was still correct. It was still the right thing. That is magic. And then the peaceful transition of power, where the losing candidate, Reagan, when he went out as the winner, but Hillary when she lost, they're making almost the word for word the same speech. They would say, which is what you should want kids in America to learn, that this is what separates America from so many countries of the past and so many others today, is this moment, the peaceful transition of power. And when Hillary lost, she said, I lost, and I'm stepping down as a proud American, stepping down. It's kind of an ethos. It's a religion in a lot of ways. It's an ethos that when your candidate loses, gets fewer votes, you accept it, and that is your president. That is a support beam. And so what Trump is doing is sending out a mind virus into a huge swath of America, which says, actually, the numbers say this, but don't believe it. And, corruption happened. So the question, I think the fair question is he partially right? Is there some? But he made so many claims, and there's a I've gone into every all the major claims. And I linked to a page in the book that I think is really useful, which is just going through all the claims and showing wrong. So this was not based in some actual corruption that was happening. This was a mind virus for selfish reasons. There's a lot of mind viruses for selfish reasons. This is one, if you care about the liberal house, you have to be like, that's like the big support beam in the middle of the house, is the trust in free elections. That is what separates. I mean, look how many countries struggle with just having a fair election. When you can't trust that, now you don't believe that's your leader. Now now there's suddenly, you want insurrection. Now we shouldn't even follow the laws of this government. We shouldn't trust their CDC. We shouldn't trust their whatever. And so it's I'm watching something decay. And then I think wokeness is another one that is, to me, that MAGA concept and wokeness specifically, not social justice, because liberal social justice of Martin Luther King style is very much inside the house, very proud of the house and saying we need to make this house do what it promised and support all Americans and actually be fair and just. That's a proud liberal saying that inside the house. Wokeness is very specifically saying that liberalism itself is bad and exploitative, and that free speech is bad, right? That it's dangerous to platform ideas that we don't like, etc. And so that's a wrecking ball outside the house. And the MAGA movement is a wrecking ball outside the house. And if you're in the house and you're squabbling with each other about specific debates, left, right, and center, I think you have to pause and say, we'll get back to these, the wrecking balls. We all need to not allow the wrecking balls. And if you're on the left, you especially have to worry about you're in charge of the woke wrecking ball and making it stop being so powerful, standing up to it. And if you're on the right, you're in charge, because someone on the right yelling about wokeness only makes wokeness seem justified. And someone on the left yelling about MAGA just makes them seem, so it's the first question is, are you pro-house or anti-house? And I am very much pro-house, because I believe that the house is what gives us good times, and the decay of the house is what will lead us to the bad times that so many people in history have gone through.
And if we had to put a super quick definition of the house, it would be liberal values?
Liberal values, liberal laws, and liberal, it's two things. It's liberal laws and rules. So the Electoral College and the First Amendment and the justice system, right? The Supreme Court, all these. That's one half of the puzzle, and the other half is liberal norms. Is the fervent kind of almost religious defense of the liberal spirit. So if the government says anyone can start a business, right? Free market. But you're part of a cultural group that says anyone who starts a business is an evil, bad person, and all your friends are going to stop talking to you, and you're going to probably be fired from your job for trying to start a business, and you're probably it's going to be hard for you to ever make money, because everyone's going to think you're an awful person. No one's going to start a business. So you can have that law that says free market, but if the culture if the cultural norm is saying business is evil, you might as well not have free market. So with free speech, the First Amendment isn't critical, right? You need it, but if free speech will get you destroyed socially and professionally, you don't have free speech. You might as well not have the First Amendment. So liberal rules and liberal norms, and the thing that glues it all together is the trust in these core liberal institutions, like the justice system, like the financial system, and like the political system, and that the trust that things are fair, and that's why actual corruption, when the media actually becomes kind of corrupt, when a president is actually corrupt, when that does so bad, because it really burns that trust. And then people start violating the norms because, well, they're violating it, whatever. And so we kind of lose that shared kind of commitment. And without the norms, then the house is going to eventually crumble.
Ooh. Okay, so now we have a much better understanding of how the house ends up falling apart. How do we stop it before it's stopped by a rebound born of just unimaginable amounts of suffering?
So I'm telling a story here, which is the pro-house story, the pro-liberalism story. And if you look at any polls or just have conversations, most Americans agree with me on that. Most, again, left, right, and center, most Americans are like, liberalism is good, and the House is good, and that free speech is good, and whatever. Most Americans think this. And so picture that's like a story. And it is a story it's a story that says liberalism is a good thing and that we should defend it. And that story is this big, powerful story. And there's competing stories, like the woke story, which says liberalism is exploitative and bad and oppressive and just a cheap disguise for the same exact kind of oppression that is always occurred, and that we need to be liberated from it, which is a term that specifically means like it's revolutionary. We need to have eventually a revolution that dissembles the master's house, and you can't use the master's tools to dissemble the master's house. No free speech. You have to actually use repression to right. So that's another story.
How do people say that with a straight face?
And by the way, that's okay. That's what's cool about liberalism. They say, sure, bring it in. You want to have a Marxist, write a Marxist book in our country? Bring it. Well, let's debate it, right? You want to be a far right person? Bring it into the conversation, right? Let's have all the ideas here. Liberalism is supple and big and open. And it says, bring it all in and let the best ideas win. Even criticism of itself. The West is critical of itself, right? Which is it's unusual. It's self-critical. And that's one of the things that makes it amazing. It also kind of puts it in danger in a lot of ways. But so liberalism says, sure, this is the big pro-liberal book, the story. I'm picturing it like a big book. And here's these other competing books. Bring it in. Let's all debate it out. Now, the liberalism book, most people agree with, and I think it stands on much sounder ground. I think history backs it up. I think looking at history says this book has been better. This story has been correct. Has led to a better world, better good times than the kind of us versus them Marxist ideas. Right, so I think it stands up to scrutiny, and most people in the U.S. believe it. So it should have no problem standing up. And then with the stories that is the most powerful, that's what's taught to kids. That becomes that maintains the ethos, right? What's happened in the last decade, last 5 years especially, is because of social media, maybe it's because of some other complex factors. So many of the people that believe the big liberalism story have become scared to say it out loud because the woke story, or in a lot of cases, the MAGA story, if you're on the right, try to be a Republican politician right now and say the most basic Reagan phrase, which is that the election was fair and that Biden is the rightful president. That's career suicide in a lot of the parts of the right. So right now, you've got these wrecking ball movements there's always wrecking ball movements. There's always movements that hate liberalism and think but something's going on now that makes it much more scary to defy them. They actually can punish dissent a lot more than they normally can. Again, maybe it's because everyone's scared of Twitter mobs. Who knows? But that's a little change that has made all the people who believe this story go silent. What happens when everyone goes silent so they still believe it, but it's in their heads? That story loses all of its power. And now this other story, which should not be able to start writing policy and entering companies and changing the way companies work to serve it, and changing government policies and changing curriculum and educating and teaching little kids that this story, as opposed to saying it's one of the stories, which is totally fine, saying this is the correct thing. And any kid or your parents, they disagree with it, they're bad people, they're bigots, right? That's been allowed. They've been allowed to do that. And that's so dangerous. So to me, this is a kind of a promising thing, because it's that if I thought that we needed a revolution, that we needed, to be liberated from this evil system, I would think, well, that's hard. It's a tall order. I don't think that. I think we have a good house, and most people like the house, and the house can stand up strong if everyone just defends it. And they're just scared. And the fear is not that they're going to get murdered. No one is lynching people who say the wrong thing right now. What they're doing is they're trying to get you fired. They're criticizing you. They're shaming you. That's a soft cudgel. It's not a hard cudgel. So it's kind of a house of cards, a soft cudgel. If everyone just stops being scared and people start showing courage, and then everyone starts copying each other's courage, this whole thing, these are marginalized back to the sidelines where they belong. And they're marginalized to the fringes until they can convince more people, because that's how you actually make progress in liberal democracies. You have to persuade. These aren't good at persuasion. So they go back to the fringes where they belong until they come up with better arguments, and liberalism is fine. We have a crisis of courage right now. And that's and again, I think that's a nice problem to have, because it means that we're so close. It's all the ideas are there that people know, and they just need to start saying what they think. And that can start to happen like dominoes when people start doing it. So that's what I'm hoping for.
Whew. I hope you're right. I do worry that Vladimir Lenin is correct. Give me one generation of children and I will change the world. That's a paraphrase, but it's pretty close. First thing Hitler did was get a hold of the kids. You can get, oh God, there was one kid that like ratted out his dad and his dad ended up being killed and they had like statues of him. It's just, oh God. That's terrifying to me. And one thing that I've been thinking more and more is that every generation, they get to have the world they want. And if you didn't grow up with the liberal values, if you weren't taught civics, which is something I want to get back to, like what exactly you want us to teach kids when we're teaching them civics. But if you weren't taught that, how much damage will one generation do? Because they're going to get the world that they asked for, good, bad, or indifferent. And at least for, like you said, the last 10 years, there's really been an erosion of two of the two pillars that we've talked about so far anyway, the trust in the liberal democracy and then free speech, just to sort of round it. So I do worry about that quite a bit. What do we need to teach people that would get them back on the, not straight and narrow, but get them back to the things that lead to the good life, which I will round to being able to say what you think is true, being able to explore ideas so that you can hold a nuanced opinion, and then having faith in the system.
I think as I said, the liberal house is our best ticket to good times. And our liberal house stands strong if people believe in it and defend it and understand how it works, understand what the alternative outside is, and they realize how important this is.
So teaching how the government is structured?
And so what I would want kids to learn is, so then and if the support beams are based on common understanding of the values and defending them, I'd want them to learn the value of those support beams. So free speech. I'd want kids to be taught that words... the old phrase, sticks and stones will hurt my bones, but words will never hurt me, because, have a thick skin towards words, and that if you disagree with someone, you can either walk away. That's a totally good option. You can have a debate, but you don't try to hurt them.
How are you going to switch that? Because Jonathan Haidt and what he wrote about, I think it was 2014, is a year that he pegs just everything changed and people went from believing in that to wanting to be protected. They want safe space. They're in a defense mode. How do we begin to unwind that?
Well, so that's a specific ideology that has been teachers have been trained on that. In the MA programs, they are ideological factories, and they have been for a while. So a lot of these teachers go into schools, they've been indoctrinated, they indoctrinate kids into a specific, again, I don't mind, as a liberal, I'm saying if your teacher wants to teach Marxism to kids, bring it. Just say this is one point of view and a lot of people disagree with it. Then it's fine. And by the way, here's what other people think, and here's what these people think, and bring this, then I have no problem.
But how do we get back to that if people are clamoring for safety?
Okay, well.
And they believe that words are violence.
Because they believe that words are violence because they're being taught that, right? So they have to be...
You think that's it?
Oh, of course.
You don't think this has anything to do with social media?
No, I think that the reason I
parenting?
think that sticks and stones will break my bones, but words won't hurt me, is because I was taught that. That's a specific thing. It's not necessarily intuitive. And now I think that woke ideology doesn't believe that. It believes words are violence. Specifically, it says words are violence. And so, and it even goes further. Silence is violence, right? So you have to not just not disagree with our ideology, because that's violent, but you have to actually be an outspoken proponent of it, because otherwise you're being violent. It's a huge manipulation, and it's the exact opposite of what you would teach in a liberal democracy if you wanted to uphold that democracy. You brought up Hitler, right? And you brought up Lenin, right? The Bolsheviks, and you could say Mao as well. One of the in indoctrinating kids, one of the things that all of they had that the current movement, that woke movement, does not have, is the ability to murder your parents if the parents are saying the wrong thing, or if the kid speaks out in class, they're going to get sent to. Right now, they actually, there's a soft cudgel, and a lot of kids, I don't think, believe necessarily what they're being taught, or they're being taught something different at home. I don't think it's as easy as you can't really have it with purity, indoctrinate a generation today. It's much harder. There's the internet, there's chat rooms, right? So I don't think I'm very concerned about what kids are being taught. I think it's also it's bad for the kids. It's really like I'm sad for kids that are learning that if someone disagrees with you, they're being violent, and that the right way to handle disagreement is to punish the person. That is what they're being taught, that you go tell the teacher, you punish the person. Eventually you go and tell social media and you get them fired, right? So that translates right to that. I think it's bad for the kids. And of course there's all these, rising anxiety and depression and all of this. So you can, this is correlation causation there, but I don't think that any of this is good for kids, but I also think it's awful for the society, but I don't think they have the hard cudgel. And I feel like I feel some optimism here because a lot of people.
Do you see the optimism in the data?
Well, what I see is, for example, I'm talking about this right now. If I were in Nazi Germany, I'm going straight to the gulag when I walk out of here because I'm sitting there and criticizing the capital P party, right? And so now you're going to really indoctrinate kids because no one's going to. There are so many people saying what I'm saying on the internet right now. There is a very strong movement to against this right now. Parents are learning about this, and it's not easy to actually indoctrinate. It's not to indoctrinate a liberal democracy. It's hard. That's why liberal democracy is cool because it is. There's some robustness there. It's hard to really. You can again. It's vulnerable to mobs and things like that, as we just saw, because you don't have a dictatorship that can say we have free speech. It is vulnerable. But it bends, but it doesn't break very easily. Bends easily, but it doesn't break, right? Which is the Red Scare. It bent, right? All of our values are going out the window. We weren't acting like Americans. All these liberal values, but the house stood. So it's not that I'm the person who just said we shouldn't get cocky. The house can fall down, but I don't feel hopeless. I feel like what needs to happen is people saying what they think. So when it comes to like kids and curriculum, yeah, I think there's a lot more awareness right now about this issue in K through 12 schools that wasn't there 3 years ago even, right? This is new. Social media, you could say, is a big problem. Everyone knows that now. Everyone talks about how social media is making us tribal and bad and unhappy and depressed. 10 years ago, everyone thought social media was great. That's when you're really vulnerable to it. So I just see a lot of progress. I see the country's wisdom starting to come along, and it looks to me a little, if I could zoom out, if I could predict, I would say that we look back on this time as like we look back on the Wild West, and that it was kind of social media sprung up. There was like mob rule. It was kind of chaotic. Radical ideology kind of like, started changing curriculum in schools and getting people fired. And this reactionary movement, was denying the election. It was kind of nuts. And that because we got, the primitive mind won round one. Because in the chaos. And then wisdom started to prevail. We created better systems. We created new kinds of social etiquette, and wisdom started to prevail. And people started to speak out. Just like after the Red Scare, at some point, it would have been terrifying to say, I think communists should get to live here and be free and have the same rights we do. And they should be able to speak about why communism's great. And that's what a good American should say. I can say that now. I would have been terrified to say that in 1951 or whatever. So we come out of these periods too. And so I don't know. I feel very frustrated, but I also feel like there's a good route towards a better way.
All right. Talk to me about power games versus liberal games, because this feels like I love your optimism that ultimately liberal games will work. But like I was saying earlier, none of this made sense to me until I started reading Nietzsche and the whole idea of will to power. Will to power being this sort of innate thing where you want to have control of your own life, but also being this strong drive to want to just be in control. And when you look at some of the current battling, it feels like that. It feels like will to power sort of taking over on both sides. What is the power game versus liberal game? And then we'll talk about how to break the trend.
Well, I mean, the easiest way to understand what the power games is just look at the animal world. Watch a David Attenborough documentary, and
where they get eaten. I just literally today watched Komodo dragon, which gets fucking big.
Can't believe they're real. Like it's crazy.
Oh my God! And it ate something the size of a deer. I don't know if it was a deer, gazelle, whatever. It just ate it whole.
Yeah.
It just ran up.
It's a dinosaur.
Grabbed it.
Yeah.
Literally. And swallowed that thing whole. It was the creepiest thing I've ever seen in my life.
Right.
So, yeah.
So let's talk about that. So the Komodo dragon ate the gazelle.
Yup.
Was that fair? Well, I don't know. And who determined? Because the gazelle had one plan. I want to keep my body for myself and keep living. And the Komodo dragon had a different plan, which said, I want to use your body for energy. I want to eat it, right? And they both, and it's fair. Right? They both are allowed to want that.
Mm-hmm.
So was there a judge that said the Komodo dragon gets eaten? No. if the gazelle is fast enough, then the gazelle has the power. The Komodo dragon can want to eat the gazelle all at once, but doesn't have the power to, so it can't. In this case, the gazelle wasn't fast enough. The Komodo dragon was fast enough, so it had the power to do what it wanted. In other words, the rule in the animal world is everyone can do whatever they want if they have the power to do so. There is no other rule. There's no right or wrong. There's no one to make sure it's all okay. If someone has the power to do this, they do it, and otherwise you can't. And now think about a bunch of people on an island, just drop them there, right? And before you know, they might create some little egalitarian thing. And then someone starts being really scary and beating someone to death who doesn't do what they want and starts saying, now everyone has to pay me taxes. And they're acting like a mafia boss. And before you know it, they're a big bully. And then if 5 people gang up together and they together can take down that big bully, and now they're in charge. And before you know it, the biggest bully is the dictator of the island. And that is the power games. That is it was Saddam running things the way he was running because it was fair, because it was right. He was doing because he had the power to do so, because people were scared of him. And so he created this story of his own ruthlessness, and people were scared of it. And so people would like to topple him, but they didn't have the power to do so. So he got to make the rules and do what he wanted, regardless of what's fair, regardless of who's suffering and who's not, and whether there's equality or whatever. That is so much of human history too. If it boils down to the gazelle and the Komodo dragon, it is the raw power games are going on, and the real rule here in this dictatorship or kingdom or sultanate or the warlord territory is everyone can do what they want if they got the power to do so. And the dictator and their little consortium has the power to do what they want, so they do, and other people don't, so they can't.
You can reboot your life, your health, even your career, anything you want. All you need is discipline. I can teach you the tactics that I learned while growing a billion-dollar business that will allow you to see your goals through. Whether you want better health, stronger relationships, a more successful career, any of that is possible with the mindset and business programs in Impact Theory University. Join the thousands of students who have already accomplished amazing things. Tap now for a free trial and get started today.
We are animals, just like we are just like the animals in David Attenborough doc. The only difference is in some rare cases in modern times, and maybe in little examples throughout other times. There are little moments in history where you're like, wow, they really kind of had an egalitarian or like a fair thing, and then it gets toppled by the Mongols or by the whoever, and there it goes, because or some coup and the king's son takes over and all those rules go out the window. So you have these little moments maybe of things seem kind of fair, maybe there's some logic to this, it's not just the power games, and then they get stomped on by the power games. And so the power games continues to prevail, and it really is the rule, and everything else is an exception, until you've got these liberal democracies which are basically designed to say, we need to come up with a way not just that's fair and that's better than the power games, but something that's resistant to the power games. Inevitably, people inside and outside the country are going to try to take over and impose the power games. And there has to be this resistance to that. And so that's when, again, I talked about the liberal house. That to me is a house where the power games are on the outside.
What's the key to that? Is it the ability to create a stalemate? Is it just we force ideas to battle? What is it that gives it that resilience?
So first of all, it's a very well thought out set of rules. I mean, these are geniuses who are not just coming up with them themselves.
You're talking about the founding fathers?
The founding fathers, not only are they really
very
really
unpopular
smart,
these days.
Well, I think that people should try living in a place that's run like the power games, and maybe they'll come back here and say they didn't do something so bad. But anyway, and of course they were flawed, but what they did was they did two things. They were historians. They knew history really well, right? They knew everything. They knew everything, from Greek philosophy to how the Romans functioned, to how great dictatorships functioned, and then they of course understood the English monarchy and parliament system really well. So they had all of this, and they had all this Enlightenment philosophy that they were all scholars on. They all went to law school. They really understood legal theory and everything like that. And then they collaborated together. And they did something amazing, which is they built a really, really complex and well thought out set of rules. I don't even understand them all. I mean, I don't think most Americans, it's really complicated. Try to understand like tort law. I mean, it was so brilliant about it is, it was not just a set of rules, but it was rules. They had a humility, which is that some of these are going to be wrong or times are going to change. So they actually you could do amendments. The court justice system would actually develop and evolve through precedent over time, and a president could come in and impose a new bill and sign something new into law, and they didn't anticipate the need for trust busting and but
What's that?
The breaking up of monopolies.
Oh.
Because but
Antitrust,
then
got it,
that
got it.
became an issue later, and so they whatever, and so there continues to be new changes, and then the system is able to argue and fight about it and end up coming to new rules that continue. So it's just rules are built upon rules, and it's far from perfect, right? It has all kinds of problems. There have been a lot of flaws, but it's this kind of, it's almost like this living system of rules. Now that's half of it. The other half is that America has like American religion. We believe all men are created equal, and equality of opportunity, and life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and free speech, and that you'll have Americans really have this religion of freedom from the government, and justice and fairness and whatever. Again, a lot of Americans haven't always followed that, but there is this real ethos, and together it is the really, really well thought out set of living laws and that enduring ethos. That is, without that ethos, who's going to uphold the law? I mean, if no one believes in it, it all goes to hell. So it's this belief in it, this reverence for those set of laws. That together is robust, and it can stand up to a lot. I mean, there's a great quote from I forget who, it was some Republican strategist in the early 50s, and he was basically saying, he was saying that Americans are acting, who are so scared of communism, they're acting like the very people that they're so scared of. They're not, we are not acting like Americans. That means something. Again, Reagan and Hillary Clinton, completely opposed ideologically, say the same thing about the peaceful transition of power. So there's this American religion which is very powerful. And so that to me is the liberal games. The liberal games is composed of these laws and this ethos and this belief in those laws that together has, at least for a couple hundred years, pretty much fended off the power games. Like there's, I always think, we give terrorists a fair trial. Someone can come to the U.S. from outside the U.S. and kill 100 people, and they will get a defense attorney, and they will get into a jail cell, and they will get a defense attorney, and they'll get a fair trial. That is so civilized. I mean, sometimes I'm just like, damn, that is so, it's not the power games here. And, again, it's the power games are always lurking under the surface, right? And so you could say, oh, there's, crony capitalism, and there's institutional racism, and there's these, these things that are actually the power games in disguise. And that's true. But power games can't fully take over. The liberal games is really powerful and really strong. And I think people who live here, they don't realize how much suffering they're not experiencing that so many of the people in the past experienced, and uncertainty and fear of invasion and fear of, dictatorship and fear of a coup, that you just don't have to wake up and be scared of that. You can go live your life. And that is, and you also can go to the grocery store, and it's full of, because liberal games also has been incredible for, for prosperity and for resources. So I'm a big liberal games fan, and someone might say, well, you think liberalism is perfect. And I'd say, no, I bet in 300 years, if I went into a time machine, I bet they come up with something even better. It's just, at this moment, it's the best thing that we've done as far as I've seen. I'd like someone to tell me that actually this system, which was very anti-liberal, has been better and for just as many centuries. And show it to me. Like, someone points it out, I'll listen.
That's interesting, the time horizon being one of the key elements of it. Because, and maybe I'm painting the liberal picture inaccurately, but it feels to me like there isn't ever going to be anything better than what I call the physics of progress, which is essentially the scientific method recontextualized for other elements of life. This was me trying to teach entrepreneurs how to build a company, knowing that if you want to be a successful entrepreneur, the thing you have to get right is you have to be able to solve novel problems. So not only problems that you haven't seen before, but problems nobody's ever seen before. And so it takes a method of approach. So I write this whole thing down. How do I do this? How have I run my companies? And I end up writing out like these 5 or 6 points, and I pitch it to my team here, and I'm like, here's what it is. And one of the guys goes, oh, that's the scientific method. And I was like, is it really? Like, I unfortunately did not pay attention in high school. And so I went, and yes, in fact, it is. I mean, it's a slight different set of words, but exactly the same idea. And it is basically going back to my definition of truth, that you're a prediction engine. If you're in science or otherwise, what you're doing is saying, I have this hypothesis, which is just a guess. I have a guess that if I do this thing, it will yield this outcome. And in business, you're doing it in a motivated way. So it's like, hey, I'm trying to get to this outcome, and there's an obstacle between where I'm at and where I want to get. And I have a hypothesis about what I need to do to overcome that obstacle to get where I want to go. Then you're going to do it. And now this is where, going back to this idea of your ego, if your ego's around learning, this will work well. If it's around being right, you're going to be in real trouble. But you run that experiment with a metric in mind, that this metric is success. So if you're the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, it's like, hey, we're going to run this campaign, and success is we get elected ethically, maybe the right word. And so you try it, and if you get elected, it was the right thing. And if you don't, it wasn't. And if it wasn't, then you need to look with humility at, okay, what did I do wrong? What could I do better the next time? And then you go reformulate your thing. That works in business, works in science, works anywhere. Only thing that's different in science is you don't want motivated thinking. You shouldn't be trying to get to a specific place, other than, I guess you could say, understanding. We want to understand better what is true. And so that becomes, I think, a really important thing, that if people can begin to function from that perspective of, okay, I'm trying to predict the outcome of my behaviors. I need to look nakedly at the reality of whether this worked or not. And if it doesn't, I'm going to adjust my behaviors and keep going. That becomes a very tricky thing if people have motivated reasoning, which you talk about in the book. I forget, you used a really clever phrase. Maybe
reasoning while motivated.
Yes, reasoning while motivated.
The reasoning equivalent of drunk driving.
Yes. Very well said.
Yeah.
Very well said. So yeah, I don't see a way around that. That feels like, you said there might be something better than liberalism. If that is liberalism, I'll be very surprised if there is something better. The sort of fine tuning of the mechanics of how government works, sure, I'm sure that can be better.
I mean, the underlying concepts that individuals should have dignity and like live, with equal under the law. I mean, it's hard for me to imagine a better. So the underlying philosophy there, of just general human rights, equality of opportunity. I mean, it's hard to see that improving upon that. Now, the actual methods to get there and all the different systems and laws, and the way we try to think how complicated equality of opportunity is. We don't just say, okay, everyone can apply for a job. Well, some people's parents were oppressed by other people's, it's like, it's complicated. So you have to have, this, and then what if someone's born dirt poor and it's not actually equal opportunity? Okay, so let's do these social systems, but not too much, because now you're infringing upon freedom, and so it's very, very, nuanced and complex attempt to achieve
this is
these
really
things.
Interesting. So now you get into something that really does sound better. Like if you just came to me out of the blue and said, hey, right now we're doing equal opportunity, but we want to do equal outcome, I'd be like, oh, word? Like that sounds a lot better. So that would be something where I would say, I get why people get behind that. From where I'm sitting, that seems destined to fail, though, once you stop and think about it based on human nature. Mm-hmm. Do you agree with that? Or do you think that, no, there really is, we really ought, that's probably the right word to use, we really ought to strive for equal outcome?
Well, it's a hard one, because if it depends how deep you go. You can say if two people are able to, freely, no matter who they were born as, try to become a billionaire, then there's equal opportunity. Someone else could say, well, if someone's born with a lot more, a lot more money in their family and connections, someone else is born into poverty and with a single
that it doesn't
parent.
Track well.
What? Yeah,
that doesn't track well.
Right.
Being born rich does not track.
Okay, well, whatever it is, if they're born, that's not true, right?
It is true.
You're saying people that are born into abject poverty do just as well as people that are born into
definitely
the
not.
top.
But
right.
being born rich doesn't.
Okay.
Doesn't track at all.
Sure.
So the reason I interrupted you is because I think that there's only. Is it the only thing? There's almost only one thing that. There's two things that matter. There we go. That breaks my hesitation. There are two things that matter. One is IQ. It matters so much. And then the other is basically the zip code you're born into, which God, this is going to be controversial, but I really believe this, having seen it up close. It's mindset and IQ. Those are the only two things that matter.
Okay, but people who are born into a parent family
Mm-hmm.
are so much less likely to end up in jail, in poverty.
I think that's mindset.
Maybe
I'm very open. Beat me to death. Show me how I'm wrong.
No, I mean you might be right. I actually I don't know that much about this. I would say that there are so here's the thing. You could say different zip codes, different whatever. There is something to wealth in terms of just the aggregate of a bunch of people born to people who are upper middle class versus people who are in the bottom 10%. I mean, you're just going to see a lot less crime, a lot more whatever. You might say that's mindset and IQ, maybe. I don't know. But the point is,
It's not IQ, unfortunately. Mindset, yes.
but so if you
Actually,
really want
fortunately.
equal opportunity,
Mm-hmm.
then like you could argue that true equal opportunity would say, well, then if someone is born with two different IQ, right, or different temperament or whatever, then they're not actually on equal footing, and that
100%
therefore
accurate.
any single disparate outcome, well, you can trace it to something. You can trace it to their internal motivation. Maybe someone's just more ambitious and cares more about success, and other people are, okay, well, that's not equal then. They were
Yes.
born with this magical, tool called ambition, whatever. So you could do this all the way to the bottom. Now, I don't think that's very wise because,
Interesting. Why not?
well, first of all, I think that it's inherent infringement on freedom to say, well, person A is less ambitious than person B, so we should make sure they have equal. I think person B wants to be ambitious and work hard to get rich, and person A wants to hang around and hang out with their family and be satisfied to be lower middle class. I don't see why it's a better situation to force them to have the same. I like the idea of freedom, and I think that people should. There's, we really, there's these studies with little kids, and one kid does 3 times the work of the other kid, and then they're both given the same reward, and the kids think that's unfair. It goes deep into our wiring to think that you should get proportional rewards to your effort and to your contribution or whatever. So I think people should be free to pursue what they want, and the point. So you, on one extreme, you say if there isn't some actual thing where jobs aren't accepting people from this background or whatever, because that's actually not equal, then therefore it's equal opportunity enough, and what will happen will happen. And then the other extreme is saying inherently anything that's different you could trace to something that was different about them. Maybe it's literally their brain itself, but that's not fair because they didn't choose to be born as this person. And so then you should have basically true equal opportunity means equal outcomes. And I would say I'm 2/3, 3/4 of the way to the first extreme, which is that I think that you should mostly have equal opportunity, and it's not, and that is inherently going to be unfair sometimes, and it's going to yield inequality, and it's going to sometimes yield unfair advantage. But you should do some stuff to mitigate that. You should have some forms of social safety net, and you should have scholarships and programs that try to give ambitious, smart people of, disadvantaged backgrounds a better, springboard to I think that you should have some of that, but just enough that, you're doing something, but not so much that you're starting to infringe upon freedom. So I think there's a fairness. There's 2 factors here. There's what is the right thing to do? What is fair? And to me, I think that almost equal opportunity with some adjustments is still unfair. But these are all unfair. And to me, that is the best balance that makes the most fair situation, even though, again, it's just not always, it's not one situation that's if you force equal outcome, that's just not fair to the person who works harder than the other. But then there's also what's practical. And so equal outcomes, we've tried it. It turns into abject poverty and brutal equal outcomes, right? It turns into the rulers making the rules have billions, and everyone else is in poverty, and there's everyone's hungry.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's I mean, again, I'm not a scholar on why communism doesn't work, but it seems partially because human nature. I think if
what do you mean by that?
Okay, if you have 10 factories and they're in a free market, they're all incentivized to try to outcompete the other factories and work really hard. And if one of the factories is producing half of the total yield of the 10 factories, they would get a lot more. And if you change that system, you say, it doesn't matter how much you're all producing, you're all going to end up with 1/10 of the total yield. It's obviously a disincentive for the productive factory. How did the productive factory get productive in the free market? It thought really hard about strategy. It worked extra hard. It worked those extra hours. It innovated. All those extra things. super hard work, innovative, just the human spirit of like, how can we, be creative here? It's going to melt away. Not some people will still have it, but most people are going to. I mean, I don't think I'd be nearly as ambitious if I knew I was going to have the same outcomes, not just in money, but in anything. Just if I knew that what I didn't have any outcome on my life. I'm not that. I'm kind of a lazy dude. I don't think I would do very much.
I don't think anybody would.
Right. And so it's obvious. I mean, this is kind of like human 101, that like this is not a good situation for prosperity. And inherently, the other thing is that it requires totalitarian government to keep everyone equal. You have to shove. Humans are so inherently unequal in so many ways that to make them all equal, you have to really apply a pretty oppressive force. And so what you end up with is the power games. Where you have a brutal dictator and you have rebellions that want to happen, and they have to put down the rebellions, and you end up with the leaders have everything, and you have the most inequality. It's just now there's a vast underclass. So now I think lots of communists would say what they do say is that that's not real communism. That's a dictatorship that was supposed to be communism, just like you would say wokeness isn't real social justice. That's not real communism. Okay, sure. But there's been 100 experiments or so, and they've all pretty much turned into abject poverty. So it's just, this is not like, I'm just basing this on history, going full to the end of forcing equal outcome. Even if in some arguments, you might say that is the fairest way. Okay, that's one philosophical position. I don't necessarily think that's true. But regardless of the fairness argument there, it just is deeply impractical. So you can't not think about practicality. And so to me, the U.S. is trying to, I think that, and again, just right here, you have the Republicans and Democrats disagree on where they should be on that spectrum of equal. So I don't know where I want to be exactly. I don't know, but I would say I'm 3/4 of the way to the pure equal opportunity free markets and 1/4 of the way to the forced equal outcome. And that to me is somewhere in there, seems to me, and I admit that I might be wrong about any of that, seems like the best balance of fairness and productivity.
So interesting. So yeah, the whole communist thing, I don't understand. This feels like one that people can eliminate at the thought experiment place to what you already said, which is no one is going to work hard and be ambitious if they're going to be rewarded in exactly the same way across the spectrum. Did you read the book, The Red Famine?
No.
Oh, if you want to terrify yourself, read The Red Famine. So I like to read books as I'm falling asleep. I couldn't do that one while falling asleep because in the book, there is a point at which, so this is what happened to the Ukraine in like the 1920s. And about the time the woman ate her 7-year-old, I was like, I'm out. I have to read this while I'm awake. I can't do as I'm drifting off sleep. It's fucking nightmarish. And that's what happens when you go, okay, everybody, to each according to their need based on your ability. Fuck, I can't remember the exact phrase. Hopefully people know it. The whole mantra of communism. And so they went and they were like, oh, the kulaks are outperforming other people. They must be evil. They're stealing. They're taking advantage of people. So they killed them. And in doing so, they then left, nobody knew how to farm. So you have the worst farmers trying to feed the country. Everybody's basically starving to death. The government's taking everything from them. And so the hard reality, and please, I hate this. I hate that this is true, but we have different abilities. We have different levels of intellect. And I do not think this breaks along racial, socioeconomic. It's just humans in the same family have different intellects and abilities and all that. And so it's
just look at athleticism.
Facts.
Why would this be different, right?
Facts.
It's just right.
So that one is just you are going to put yourself in a really dark position when you do that. So I will often speak on, people always say, just don't talk about things, Tom, that you don't know and you'll be fine forever. I like to talk about things as a way of saying, this is how I would think through a problem that is novel. Going back to my whole thing about entrepreneurs, you have to be able to think through a novel problem. So I obviously do not know what the answer to any of this is. It is all insanely complicated. And I come to this truly with humility. I come to this assuming I'm wrong at all times. I just want someone to show me how I'm wrong. But I do need a hypothesis, which is just a guess, but I need a hypothesis in order to effectuate action. So here is my hypothesis. You're never going to get equal outcome without the most sinister hammer to beat down the people that rise up, because getting the people that are underperforming to rise is brutally difficult. It's just way, way, way too hard. So people are always going to default to beating the people that are succeeding down. But if you want to get close to equal opportunity, it is when you take practicality into it, it's education is the only question. And you've got to just have the world's most unbelievably effective education system, which will take iteration and trial and error and all that stuff. But if you don't do that, if you don't say, hey, as a nation, we're just going to educate the life out of our populace, you're always going to be in bad shape.
Yeah, I mean, when you educate, what you're doing is you're taking the raw talents and you're actually like bridging the gap between raw talent and productivity, right? Because there is a big gap there. If someone's born in the woods, if Einstein is raised in the woods by a pack of wolves, he won't even be able to invent the bow and arrow, because it doesn't matter how smart he is. There's this giant knowledge tower that humanity has contributed to over, thousands of years and built, that he was born on top of, just like we're all born on top of it. And with all of that, he then figured out general relativity. And so think about how much more Einstein could do for the world because he was educated. And so, of course, it's just that's the extreme example, but like every kid has some talent and some ability. And when you're educating them all, you're just maximizing the potential there. And you're getting closer to something that is more fair, that is more, that is a way to level the playing field a little bit. But there is an ethos in the US right now that is not that different than this, that if there is inequality, it is, instead of the nuanced position, which is that there is some unfairness that created the inequality and that maintains it. And there's also some fairness, actually, that would lead to, inequality. You have a million people that are all different abilities, different ambition levels, different energy, different values. And you're going to have inequality. If everything is as fair as possible, you're still going to have inequality. So instead of the nuance thing, which is saying we have to look at inequality, whether it's not, in unequal representation or whether it's in wealth inequality, and we have to try to suss out what ingredients that went into this are injustice, and which ingredients in here are not injustice, because there's both. Instead, the ethos is injustice. Inequality equals injustice, period. And that to me is not it's an ethos that it does not yield productivity or fairness in the end. And I think it's a very disempowering. It's a very disempowering thing to teach kids, that this country, because there's inequality, is inherently oppressive. And I think it's just demotivating.
So how do you deal with the country having an imperfect past, being founded by people that owned slaves, at least some of them? How do you do that? Is it a separate the message from the messenger? Is it contextualizing them?
Yeah, well, first of all, you have to contextualize everyone. I mean, 96% of Americans in 1958 said that interracial marriage was immoral. Today, someone who says interracial marriage is immoral is probably a pretty bigoted person. So was everyone back then, and someone that you wouldn't really want to be friends with or that you wouldn't admire. If I went back to 1958, is everyone just that kind of person? No, it's that these are not people they're no worse than we are. They just live in a different time, right? So it's not excusing it. Just like it's not excusing the fact that people own slaves, especially given that some of them didn't, like John Adams, and was saying this is bad and this is evil. And a lot of the founders who owned slaves grappled with it. I mean, they knew this was bad. But the point is, yes, I think of course it should be in context. But your other point is that, like, the point is that, for example, Black Americans are one generation away from Jim Crow. They're 5 generations away from slavery, or maybe they're 2 from Jim Crow and 5 from slavery and 1 from a bunch of housing policies and genuine illiberal, examples of the House not being what it's supposed to be. And so obviously that is going to have a long-term effect, given how much, these things compound over time. And so, as I said, I'm 3/4 of the way to the equal opportunity thing. I think, let's take that into account and let's do something about it, but not go so overboard that you end up hurting everybody, which is, I think, a lot of the policy suggestions go so overboard with that they actually hurt everyone. And it becomes unfair, and it's not good I don't think it's good for any parties at that point.
Mm-hmm. Any answer to me that doesn't include just an absolute perfection of the education system is destined to fail.
That's a tough one, though, because what do you educate kids on? Seth Godin
Would you
has
like
this
that
great
in
TED
alphabetical order or order of importance?
Well, the point is that a lot of people disagree on what. I mean, it's like you and I probably don't agree on everything, and 100
No,
other
but
people.
you and I guarantee after this conversation, we would both say, okay, here's my stance. You'd say, here's your stance. And then we'd go, but we're going to predict an outcome and that we want, a very desired outcome. And if what we're doing isn't getting that outcome, then we know we need to change. And we'll go into what I call the physics of progress, and we'll keep refining. No, we're never going to get it right on the first swag. But I'm just saying there is a system that you can set up. This goes back to the idea of liberal values. And I do not know liberal values in that way well enough. Like, I am so coming at all of this as like an entrepreneur who's just seeing everything from the outside now and coming in. So I could be using these words wrong. But like, when I think about liberal values, I think about the scientific method. I think about Enlightenment values. I think about, I think doing this will yield this result. But if it doesn't, then I'm going to go, I was wrong. And I need to update my model of the world and my thinking, and I need to tweak and change until I can accurately predict the outcome of my behaviors. So I really want to believe, and strike me down if I'm incorrect, that if you and I were building the education system, we'd be like, okay, we're going to take our best guess. It's going to be a little wacky in the beginning. And then we're just going to refine. And we're going to try to put things in place, much like the founding of the US, where it's like, hey, wildly imperfect system, wildly imperfect people that have put this in place. So we want a system that will self-correct, self-heal, et cetera, so that over time, it just gets better and better and better. True?
Yes. I think you talk about with entrepreneurship, you have a metric, which helps. You have something to measure.
Yep.
Here you could do test scores, but then you have teachers teaching to the test, right? You could say it's in wealth, but maybe you have mass depression. So it is also, you have to figure out. It's a tough one because sometimes you're not going to see the results for 20 years, so it's also not a quick experiment.
Yep. Unfortunately, far longer than 20 years, I'm sure.
Right. And so you're not going to see the results for a while, and it's also, you have to also argue about what the metrics even are that you're going for. Mm-hmm. Are you trying to, then there's also there's a lot of facts that, there's a lot of education does not happen in schools, as evidenced by the fact that so many experiments, when they pour money into schools, it doesn't change anything about the test scores or the outcomes. And what changes it is how many books the parents have in the house. That's a metric that tends to track with success and with crime and stuff better than how much money was poured into their public school. So it's also really complicated where education even happens.
Agreed.
But that's exactly why what you're saying.
But are you saying the problem is unsolvable?
No, that's what I'm saying. That's why I agree with you, actually, is that you can't have just ideological approach to this. You have to say, okay, yeah, there's a lot of places education happens. There's a lot of potential things that we would want to educate kids on. And there's a lot of ways we can measure success and disagree on that. So
I think that's the one thing we'd have to really
is the
think
metric.
about. Yes, because if you can't agree on what we're trying to do, now
there's
you
some
get
obvious
people pulling
ones.
in
Obviously,
crazy.
you want not fewer people in jail, right? That's a big one. So crime is just at the that's that we can all agree on that. And then I think you could say crime and poverty, right? So you want the highest percentage of kids emerging from or not falling into poverty later in life.
Can I give you the highest level thing?
What?
I think the highest level thing is going to be human flourishing. We won't agree on what that means, but at least if we can steer towards, okay, human flourishing is our aim. Now let's
maybe
work
it's so
backwards
is
and
it
start
happiness
defining
scores
that.
versus you measuring people's happiness, and if
I'm
you
going
have
to get crazy here, and I'm going to say we're going to take blood levels because I'm going to get real weird on everybody. So I don't want a subjective measurement of happiness. I want an objective measurement of like stress markers. So looking at stress markers, looking at longevity, I guess you do want some subjective measurements of like happiness. Tell me, are you living the life that you want? So that you can get some adjustments. You want to look at what are markers of access to nutrition, access to jobs. You certainly can't say that somebody is going to do well in that job or not because of all the things we talked about earlier. But are you able to access the information so that I know you at least have a shot? I don't know if it's a test or whatever, but that you have a shot to learn the thing that allows you to pass the test, that allows you to gain access to the knowledge that you would then need to apply for a job in your given thing. Look, I don't know the answers. I want to be very clear. This is just me trying to see where the edges of how I think through the problem
I feel like
are.
it would be maybe is also, it's like you might want to measure, you help kids understand all the options out there and get to know themselves well enough to figure out what they want in life. So that's half. And then what percentage of kids are getting what they want in life after they figure it out. So it's are they learning about all the options and learning about themselves so that they actually develop goals wisely in a way that actually is like useful, and then how are they achieving? So it's like two things maybe. I don't know. It's hard to
This is
measure.
so complex. I am way beyond what
I'm
I
very
feel like I
happy it's not
understand.
my problem to do this because it's the most daunting issue because, and it's also like, yeah, maybe you had, billions of dollars and 1,000 test kids. Okay, now we could really, but that's not what you have. You have these underfunded school districts and you have kids coming in with behavioral problems. And it's just like, it's just also such a hard problem because it's like trying to run a business, but you're underfunded and half of your building's on fire as you're trying to, so it's really difficult.
Yeah. And I think in the beginning, so I'll take us off this topic in a second because I clearly do not have deep wisdom here that I'm sharing, but I do think that you also have to look at things like GDP. How are we performing at large? Okay,
but maybe that goes against maybe a bunch of people that are trained on an ideology where success and wealth is the most important thing. Maybe that's going to yield a good GDP, but those stress markers in the blood are going to go the exact wrong direction. So you also,
this is why you want people to be able to choose. And I think that's going to be one of the fundamental drivers. So you have people like me that want to just work and work and work and work and work because I love what I do and I derive meaning and purpose through that. And I just love it. I have been ambitious since I was a little kid. I'm sure to some extent I was born with it, something about the family I don't know, but I was an outlier in my family. Everybody thought I was crazy. I've been saying I'm going to get rich from the time that I was like 11 or 12. My entire family used to make fun of me, but there is not it's not a coincidence that the one person in the family that was just obsessed and was like, I'm going to get rich, ended up getting rich.
This is why equal outcome is not fair. I mean, forget all the controversial things you can say about natural ability or about, nepotism and starting place. Forget those. Just right there. You're more ambitious than your siblings with the same upbringing, probably pretty similar natural, innate abilities. And
as a kid, anyone would have told you that my sister was smarter than me,
right.
For sure.
And maybe she is. And the fact is, I don't think your sister would say it's so unfair that he has more money than I. She would say, well, yeah, he's nuts. He
I don't want to work
crazy
like a maniac. Yes,
right. Yeah, exactly.
Accurate.
And so it's just an equal outcome. You probably would have given less to the world. And yeah, so anyway, we don't have to go back onto that, but it's just a perfect example right there.
Very interesting. Okay, so while we're on the topic of equal outcome, equal opportunity, and I know that you look into the future. In fact, I think you're writing a book about the future. Your face.
It involves the future.
How do you feel about people manipulating the IQ of their offspring?
With caution, and I think just like anything, think about new technology that is developed. Well, what do? We start to understand it. We argue about it. We have political fights about it. We get wiser. New kids are born with fresher eyes on it, and we see a bunch of bad mistakes that are made, and we learn from them. And over time, we develop wise policies. So with all of the usual, friction, I'm all for it because, first of all,
I wasn't expecting that answer. I love it.
Oh yeah. Well, because first of all, like you said, IQ matters. I mean, it's a predictor of crime and success and mental health and happiness and all these other things. I'm not sure about happiness, but it is predictor of all these things that are important in life. So more of it, I would say, is probably on the aggregate good. I think we can be better at solving problems. I think people can be better at getting what they want from life and living rich lives if they have a higher IQ. And I think that I think on the aggregate, I think we can solve more problems and be wiser together. And the other bigger point here is that it's not like we're living these like perfect life without manipulating anything, in harmony with nature right now, and we're suddenly going to be doing this unnatural thing, playing God with our kids' brains. Every piece of fruit you eat has been invented by us. Your dog was invented by people. Inside doesn't exist. We invented the concept of being inside. We invented these homes. Clothes. None of this is natural. The nutrition, the supplements you take. The people get pacemakers in their heart. You go get surgery. You get an organ transplant, right? We are already completely weird transhumanists. I can talk to you from across the world with this rectangle in my hand. Like, that's a cyborg ability that we have just because it happens to be in my hand and not in my brain. Who cares? So we are already on this train, and it has overwhelmingly, on the aggregate, made things better over time. I mean, some people might argue that the hunter-gatherers were actually way happier, maybe, but I don't want to go be a hunter-gatherer. So as someone who much prefers to be here with a long lifespan and general kind of freedom and safety and nutrition and options, and I owe those things to all the weird things. You know, beavers build dams. Would you say beavers are playing God with the river? No, it's like, that's what they do. We happen to be mega beavers, and we build all kinds of weird, they manipulate a river, we manipulate everything, right? And so of course you can go too far. You climate change, right? You can obviously like, this ability can get us into trouble. That's why you want to be wise. And I'm sure the IQ manipulation of kids' genetic engineering, obviously that can go in really unwise, awful directions, and there will be some horrible tragedies. But just like cars come around, million people, maybe 2 million, die every year in car accidents, right? I don't think many of us want to go back to horses. So there will be tragedies. It will come along with real downsides, but I think it'll be a giant net positive over the long run. Or even, I don't even have to say that that's strong. I'm not sure it'll be a net positive, but either way, it's what we do. We build all kinds of dams, and this is going to be the latest. And so we're not going to stop it. We're not going to stop humanity from innovating. So the best we can do is say, okay, what have we learned from the giant technological paradigm shifts of the past? Let's try to be as wise as possible about this crazy thing that's going to happen. And the best thing we can do for this and all future crazy debates that we're going to have about these new things that are happening and how to handle them is scientific method stuff. Can we experiment? Can we argue? Can we have nuanced debates? Can we come up with wiser solutions? If the genetic engineering thing becomes abortion, and you have the pro this side and the pro this side, forget it. Now the whole thing is just a religious war, and no one's thinking. And it's just, if someone on this side disagrees with their side, they're going to be ostracized. And so it could get there. And that's what part of what concerns me about our current political environment is that we have so many hard problems ahead, big discussions we have to have as a species. And, you know, our society has to be able to have its wits about us. We have to have our wits about us going into this future where we're getting more godlike power, and be wise about it, because the stakes are going up. And when I hear about a debate like that, I just kind of have this nightmare scenario in my head of today's culture, you know, handling that. And I think very quickly you have this crew and this crew and this conspiracy theories and this, and just, you know, we won't be wise. That's a great way for us to be our worst selves and make bad decisions and really screw things up.
I wrote a comic book about this called Neon Future, not about this, but about this culture making a very important decision about AI and robotics. And in the comic, my hypothesis is that the world will bifurcate, and there will be people that are like, over my dead body, revert technology, go back to somewhere in the mid-90s. And then other people will embrace it wholeheartedly, and that you'll get this schism. As you think about the realities of this culture is going to make decisions about AI, it's happening right now. What do you think? Is this all going to go awry? Because we're having to contend this minute.
I mean, it's any prediction I would make is totally out of my ass, because we haven't done this. It's like AI is, the way to think about it is there's a super intelligent alien species on its way here. And we don't know if we see the spaceship, we're not sure how fast it's moving. We don't know if it's 4 years away or 40 years away, but it's coming. And someone's like, well, I'm an optimist. Someone's like, well, I'm pessimist. It's like, who the hell knows? Are they altruistic? Are they coming here to conquer us? Do they not care and they're just going to stomp all over us by accident while doing their thing because they just don't care either way? We don't know. We don't know what they want. And we are, in this case, we're building it. Just, I think, if humanity were a single person, I would say you're an idiot for building this. But humanity is not, and it's a collective, and it has a life of its own. The collective humanity, I call it the human colossus. It builds, and there's not really anything you can do to stop it. And even if the individuals all say this is bad, it's someone will be building, and then it's an arms race, and then you have to. It builds, and so progress is happening. The aliens are coming. We are summoning them, regardless of whether each individual is saying we shouldn't do this. And so I have no idea what it's going to be like. I think we should. And now, the one difference this year, we are actually creating. I think it is inevitable that the aliens come because we're going to build this. What's not inevitable is we actually can possibly control the personalities of these aliens and their goals. Maybe not. Some people would say Eliezer Yudkowsky would say we're 50 years away of AI alignment research from being able to have any ability to control what they're going to be like, and we should stop it when we can't. So it's doom. And then other people argue that we should be able to actually. Jan LeCun says, we should be able to raise it like children into being who we want it to be. I don't know. We've never built this before, so how would I know? I'm not the AI researchers. The ones actually building it, they don't know how it works or what's going to happen. So I certainly don't know. And I think a lot of times people's optimism or pessimism in this situation like this is just about who they are. Some people are just optimistic, and that's what their default is, unless it's officially bad, they know, then they're going to always just default to optimism. And I'm like that. So in my head, deep down, if you set me in a time machine and say I'm pressing 2060 and you get out of the time machine, my gun to my head, I expect I get out and I'm like, this is awesome. Everything's amazing. That's what I think. Partially because that's what's happened in the past. Someone from 50 years ago or 100 years ago, that's what they would think about today's world. They would think it's incredible mostly. And so I think and I think some other people, they assume 2060 you get out and it's just either humans are gone or it's back to the Stone Age, or there's an AI dictatorship or human dictatorship using AI and we're awful dystopia. Who knows?
Are you on board with pressing pause on the development, or do you want to see it go?
Yeah, I mean, there was like that letter. There was like something very basic. It was like these large language models are moving very quickly. Let's press pause on those. Yeah, that just seems wise. Like you're like, we're in a car, barreling up a mountain of progress, and there's kind of thin ridges, and we don't go off the. Let's just pause for a second. Let's talk about it. I mean, that's how any smart human would do something important with such high stakes. They would say, but in this case, some people would argue, well, China is not stopping, so you can't get the whole thing to stop and talk about it. So it's complicated, but. Yeah, I mean, I think that going full speed ahead with the only mechanism of that's driving the whole thing is just like ambition to build without any kind of like conscience or like discussion or like a bigger picture thinking is obviously not the best plan. I just don't know I don't know if it's realistic. I don't know if that does anything. But yes, I'm all for a pause.
So, given that seems to have gone unheeded, although there is now some talk about regulation. Do you have if you were going to put your ideas in the ring for what we should do with that pause? Is it all around alignment? Is it just creating a regulatory environment?
Yeah, I mean, regulatory stuff is hard here because you can't halt things. You can't fully control it and make okay, now we stopped it and now we can let it go as we please safely. You can't do that. You can maybe do some kind of regulation with giant computing centers, which is needed for this. That's one thing that we have going for us. Is
just not let them get too big?
Yeah, I mean, maybe that we treat them like nuclear reactors in Iran, and we're just like, we don't want them to, that's one possibility. That's the thing. One thing you have going for us is that you can't, at this moment at least, create super intelligence AI in your basement, your mom's basement, someone genius programmer, because you just need so much raw computational power that right now, big tech almost has a monopoly on like the ability, at least for certain things like large language models, to actually train those from scratch. I think just requires a huge, at least, a solid, I don't know if it's just big tech, but you can't just do it from your laptop. So yes, I think there should at least be lots of vigorous conversations about regulation and what would you regulate and what is regulatable here, and what are the risks and what are the pros and cons. I mean, just to be having those vigorous, it should be like, that should be one of the main political discussions we're having right now, and one of the main intellectual discussions we're having. And then, yeah, I mean, it's like when these new large language models hit, it's just like all these new companies are springing up, and it's like this paradigm shift is coming at us very quickly. And yeah, just I think pausing to catch our breath and like see what this thing can really do. You have discussions about, could this lead to super intelligence, or is this a dead end for that? Which, that's a debate right now. Could this thing turn into general intelligence? Or is it not? Is it just kind of like a very brute forced but dumb big autocorrect, some extremely fancy autocorrect? Is that all it really is? And it can't understand English, it can't actually understand the words, or is it actually learning to understand concepts? I don't know. And there's some people that talk about having GPT-4 describe how GPT-3 works. Let's experiment with that. Can the AI tell us about the AI? I mean, so I don't know. Right now, I'm just shooting from the hip because, I just like I haven't dug as deep with this as I will have by the time I'm finished with this book. But also, I just think it's when we're going into totally unprecedented waters. It's again, if we're discussing the aliens are coming, should we all have our guns, or should we create a peace treaty, or should we ignore them, or should we, it's like you can take guesses, but I don't know. One of the ways I gauge as a writer who reads, I'll read a lot of different people's opinion, and I'll look at what the different lines of thought are when I'm researching something. I can tell there's a certain type of topic where the experts are wildly disagreeing with each other, completely opposing each other. And that's what tells me that the species has no idea what it's talking about yet. Once we start to figure it out, then most of the experts start to, and that doesn't mean they're necessarily right, but they're more likely to, it means the species might be starting to figure this one out. Right now, I'm like, the species does not know how dangerous AI is, how to make it safer, how great it could be. I also think that we forget that this thing could solve all of our problems if we're still here to have problems. And it also could allow, the AI itself could, of course, become super intelligent, which is super scary. But also, even if it doesn't, you're giving, magic wands to all kinds of people. You're going to be able to have a Zoom convo with someone who maybe you met online, who's been, you started liking their tweets, you DM with them, you became friends. You had a phone call with them, and now you're having a Zoom, and we're talking. And you don't know if they're a real person or not.
That's crazy.
Right? And so that's when you combine the video synthesis and the voice synthesis and then the language. You put those three together, you have a Zoom call with someone, and you do not know if that's just some code putting on pixels on a screen that looks like a person, or if that's a human. And so we're not that far from that. And then when you have that, what does that mean? You have... So there's one debate about, well, will AI become sentient? And if it becomes sentient, that's really scary. Okay, but you don't even need that. You can have people believe that's sentient. And so now people think that's a real person, and that person can manipulate millions of people into voting a certain way, into undermining the support beams, undermining trust, convincing people that the election is stolen, just spreading. It's pretty scary because if you think about there's not some it's not like we're on the liberal house is made of steel bars, physical ones, right? And it's made of, these concepts, these abstract things like trust and shared understanding. And so those who want to erode that will have an easier time. Liberal democracies have been extremely robust through crazy waves of change. Can they stand up to this? I don't know. I hope they can. I hope this is yet another thing that liberal democracies, man, it even survived this, or maybe not. Maybe this is the end. We could be, and you have to accept this. It's scary, but we could be at the end of America as we know it. And in 10 years, we're looking back. In 20 years, we're saying we did not know how good we had it. Oh my God, imagine if you just go back and you could, and that's real. One of the things I think people should do, or, this isn't even, again, I feel deep down probably optimistic, but I still think if there's countries you want to go to, if there's things you want to do, just enjoying yourself out there, if you want to go and pick up a new hobby, do it. Because I don't know how, you shouldn't count on 20 years down the road and you don't know what's going to be going on. You might be sheltering somewhere, trying to find your next meal and being scared of that you're going to get shot by the warlord down the street and thinking about when you could have just picked up and gone on a camping trip. I mean, do the things you want to do now, because you don't know how long it's going to last.
God, I hope that does not become a clip that people snap out and it's like they're watching it in the radioactive rubble.
I know,
it's
sad and scary, and I think we should feel a little sad thinking about it, and that will help us to be more wiser. The worst thing we can be is cocky and think America always survived. My parents, my grandparents, they all had risks and they survived theirs and we'll survive ours. And this is just how things are. And my grandkids are going to be living in the similar life than just that attitude will absolutely give us the worst shot at a good future.
What scares you more, the collapse of liberal values or AI?
Well, I mean, I think they go together. And so some people criticize me for saying, why is he so focused on the culture war when there's things like AI and nukes and all this? But to me, what I'm really focused on is the house, the liberal house. The culture war to me is a kind of a mechanism that is destructive to the house. And when it's heating up, that puts the house under more strain. And to me, the liberal house is not just what has given us a good past, but it gives us the best shot to solve big problems. It allows us to be wise as a people, because when we have free speech, we can form a giant brain by putting our brains together like neurons in a larger brain and make better decisions. That's how we built this incredible civilization, magical, that no human can do, because we actually can have super intelligence together in a place like the liberal house. Better than in other places. So to me, it's like this house is not just what allows us to have good times now, but it gives us the best shot of staying in good times and solving big problems and rising to challenges. And when if the liberal house starts to go away and suddenly it's just kind of a war of scary ideologies and everyone's scared and everyone and people start quarantining their thoughts to their little conversations or to their own head, that's when we become really stupid as a species. And that's when I just think now the threats all are much worse. Now we're much more likely to have nuclear war. Now we are much more likely to build misaligned AI, I think. And so, yeah, so I think they go together. I think in some ways the liberal house is like it's almost the first thing, because it's like put your own mask on before starting to do stuff. Let's just make sure that we have a functioning, societal structure that we are functioning in, and now we can try to solve problems. If the structure fails, forget the problem. So, but obviously, if I had to say, okay, what's more likely to have a safe future? If I could press a button and say AI just goes away, or the liberal democracy, the culture war, heats up and starts to really erode our electoral trust and stuff. I think if you zoom way out, probably the safest thing would be to get rid of AI and just accept, we might just be another civilization that ends up in, civil war, and then there are really some bad times, but we're still around. Well, AI could legit extinct everyone. So I mean, I think that maybe it's like AI is a bigger risk, but the thing we can do to control it is that's why the liberal house's strength gives us the best shot to do well with this thing, which is happening either way. So I guess that's how I see it. That's the thing we can control more, is how we're functioning together and how we're having these conversations and how we're solving problems.
Yeah, once you stop thinking about the individual and you just start thinking about the society, I agree with you. I am certainly in the short term far more worried about people, certainly people in groups, and how that can click over and become madness very fast in all one wave and gets really scary than I am AI. But for sure, if you're like, wow, look, it's only 50, 60 years of absolutely agonizing turmoil, trauma, and loss. But we come back on the other side.
I totally agree with you. Most important to me selfishly right now is just let's have our society functioning well and being not collapsing. If I'm an alien watching Earth and I'm rooting for them to go extinct, I'm thinking, I'm not worried about the culture war. I'm that's not going to extinct them. AI might, right? AI, oh yes, they're making AI. This is when they're really going to, they're building the great filter.
Great filter.
I had a crazy thought the other day that one of the things for the Fermi Paradox, which is the paradox of why we don't see evidence of alien life, given that we should see so much of it. And one of the theories is that we might be early, really early. Like maybe there were gamma ray bursts and other hectic kind of conditions in the early universe that made it very hard for intelligent life to develop because planets just got sizzled at some point along the way before enough time had passed. Or intelligent life did develop and it got sizzled. So now we're actually starting to be one of the first. There's one of the many, there's theories that say, no, we might be very rare. Maybe actually it's very unlikely that we got here, but we did. And most of the others don't because they don't ever form complex cells, that sort of freak thing that happened. Or there's theories that say, no, there's a lot of things that get to our level. And then there's some great filter that they all hit and we're about to hit it ourselves at some point. That's really depressing. Or that, no, there's none of this. And there's tons of species out there. And there's just lots of other reasons we wouldn't have seen them. But the most interesting one to me in some ways is that maybe we're early. And we're one of the very first to get to this level. So there will be a lot. But someone's got to be early, right? And they're going to assume that they must not be, but they are. So maybe that's us. And if that's us, because one of the things you say is, well, why would we see it? Maybe AI kills off things like us when they build it, but then we'd see evidence of AI going and doing things amongst the stars. So maybe this is the first or one of the very first times that a species has gotten to a level where they can create advanced AI, super intelligent AI, and that something crazy is happening for the whole universe right now, where the AI we're creating here is going to end up being a super predator that all other species forever have to deal with. And it's unlikely.
This is dark.
No, so it's unlikely. It's unlikely because, of course, what are the chances? But it's just a weird thought that like maybe we're doing like the most important event in cosmic history is currently happening here on Earth. Like the Fermi Paradox, the fact that we haven't seen any aliens, at least gives that a chance. Like it's one plausible explanation. So anyway, side topic, but it's just been something I've been thinking about.
No, I found that really interesting. So here is I have not looked deeply into this, but my gut instinct around the Fermi Paradox goes something like this. The least interesting thing a superintelligence could do would be to physically explore the stars. And that what you end up doing without needing to harness the power of a star or anything that dramatic is you just turn inward. And so if we can really create simulations that meld, they don't even have to be like crazy, they don't have to be crazy high fidelity. If you're able to jack into your own nervous system, they just have to feel real. And so you would probably two things would happen. Phase number one is you would begin manipulating your own neurochemistry, your own physiology, and you would call them dreamlike experiences where you can explore not only infinite universes, but you can explore infinite universes that are not beholden to any sort of laws of physics or even logic. So you can just have these incredible dreamlike states, or imagine effectively being able to lucid dream your entire life. Like that would be pretty intriguing. And then the other would be that if you could, and I don't know if I've not thought through this well enough to know if you could truly become a self-sufficient energy generating species that lived in a virtual world. That's the one thing would you always need a correlate in the real world harnessing energy? It's a great question. But if you could, again, going completely digital, you now don't need to be bouncing around the universe, especially a universe, at least from our corner of it, that's just so empty. Like there's so
the
much
distances
space.
are so huge. It's so expensive to go.
Like I have a feeling long before you figure out how to bend space time.
You just upload to some magical virtual world. You go, right? And why would you deal with also like biology?
Yep.
Why would you deal with biology, and why would you deal with physics in the universe when you could just go into, you could just upload. What's interesting is maybe if one of the characteristics of this thing that advanced civilizations do when they upload themselves is that they don't like to, they if they know it's fake, then it doesn't do as much for them. So they create this situation where they don't know that it's not real, which means you might be in one right now.
Right.
And either I'm in it too, because we share it, you go in and there's lots of other consciousnesses, or you're in your own little brain vat and we're all figments of your imagination. We're all just created for the simulation and you're the only consciousness here.
Or there is no consciousness and it's all a simulation.
Well, there's consciousness because you have it. I guess I don't know you have it, but I know I have it.
Meat-based, I should say.
Right. There's no meat-based.
So when you say brain vats, do you mean literal brain
Yeah,
vat?
no. The concept of uploading the more fancy version of that, which
So
is
we are a simulation, but we're all conscious.
maybe
Simulation, or at least one of us.
It's just there's always a chance that this is currently what's happening, and of course there's also the theories that we are all one we are in a simulation of some other species that does these things, and we're one of them. And there's way more simulations in existence than real ones, because you can create a trillion simulations of one species. So it's much more likely we're in one than not. That's this Nick Bostrom line of argument. But that's another solution to the Fermi paradox, because you'd say, okay, well, if it's like a Minecraft world. It's just like a rendered universe, and they don't spend that much time on it. So why would they program other species into it? They're trying to study us, so they build a universe around us and see how long it takes us to figure out what's going on or whatever. And that's the experiment, or not. I don't know. But maybe there's lots of other things in this simulation. But I think that when I look back at people who had thought the Earth was flat, or who thought that the stars were the underside of the dome of heaven, they feel so in the dark. They feel so like, wow, you just didn't know about reality. Look at this conversation we're having. Like, so yeah, we know more than they did about this particular situation. We don't know what the universe is. We don't know if it's one of those things where you go really far in one direction, you come back from the other side eventually. Like it's this 4-dimensional kind of self-contained space where it's, like a 4D version of when you walk straight in line on the Earth, eventually you'll come back from the other direction. Maybe we don't know. We don't know if it's a hologram. That's a theory. We don't know if it's part of a frothing multiverse. We all know if we're in a simulation, we don't know if there's a creator, because if it's a simulation, there is a creator, like religious style, there's a creator. And we don't know if that creator would have our consciousness recycled somewhere else. So there could be an afterlife, like even if you're not religious. The fact that we don't
go deeper on that. That doesn't make sense to me.
So just say, if you just think we're in a cold, dark, physical universe, and you're an atheist, which is how I grew up, it's pretty grim, because you don't have any hope for an afterlife. You think you die and it's just lights out and that's it. And I was always jealous of people who believed in an afterlife, because man, they could have, even if they weren't sure, they just had some hope. But now I have two lines of hope as an atheist that have developed. One is just concept of cryonics right now, or whatever, that future tech will allow humans to live a lot longer, or to upload their consciousness or whatever. And so, again, I wouldn't put my money on it necessarily that I live to 500, but it's definitely a non-zero chance. And I didn't grow up thinking that. I thought everyone dies by 110 or whatever. So, there is that possibility, genuine. And that's, again, as an optimist, a little hope goes a long way for my psyche to be like, so it's probably going to happen, And then the whole other line of thought is that if we are created, we are in a simulation. It means that, what am I? I'm just like a program in the simulation. And when I die, as far as I know, one of the things that creator does is you die and you end up somewhere else, where now you're going to be interviewed by the simulator and you're going to go live in some happy world that they put you. Who knows? It could be anything, but there's no reason to think that it's lights out, that they could take that code and they say, no, that code, that person's learned so much. Now we send them to the next thing, where given what they've learned, we want to do another set of a world that they live in. I just don't know. The point is, there's a non-zero chance that the simulator, again, it's very religious at sounding. It's like there's a creator who can do what they want with my soul, my code after. And those two things give me this little, like the sky, the gray sky, like a little bit of blue skies there. I'm like, hey, who knows? And that's all I want, is just the who knows. That's if your starting place is there's nothing, there's just blackness after death and for non-existence for eternity. That's a pretty grim starting point. You can only go up from there. So a little hope, I'll take it.
Now, I've heard you say that nobody wants to live forever.
That is true.
Help me reconcile.
No, some
that
people
it parts the clouds.
Some people think they want to live forever, for sure.
I definitely do.
I definitely thought I did. And then I wrote a post on this thing called Graham's number.
So, but why then do you consider the possibility of an afterlife to be a parting of the clouds?
Because I can choose. I actually once did a post asking readers, how long would you, if you had a calculator?
Is this Graham's number?
No. You could type in any number, and that's how many years you're going to live. What would you type in? Right. And again, some people, I said there's an infinity button. Some people hit that. And I think that I'll explain why that is very wrong.
You're going to have to, because I am convinced.
But I would say 5,000 years. I said 50 centuries is a nice chunk of time. 50 centuries, I could do a lot And, I probably, granted, I'm sure on century 49, I'd suddenly be like, I wouldn't be like, I'm ready. I'd be like, no, I have so much more, of course. But at least give me 50 centuries, give me 10 centuries. 1 century is nothing. Think about how recent the year 2000 was.
Yeah.
Remember Y2K? That was almost a quarter century ago. We get we get max a century. So that's a quarter of a human life since Y2K. This is not enough time. So I'm partying in the clouds because I want my other 49 centuries. Maybe I would like 400 centuries. I'd like my ability to choose. I want to choose. And I think once we are in a world where people decide when it's time to bow out, and there's a whole ritual and there's a ceremony and it's beautiful and everyone says goodbye to them and there's all this closure and they've chosen and everyone respects that. And it's a whole new, culture that's built around this concept. They'll look back on today when everyone got taken by their dying mammal that they live in the first 100 years, and some people got taken really early and they lose loved ones and people still want to live. It is so sad and so tragic, and it is heartbreaking reality we all live in. Now, that said, I would much prefer to die at 80 or today than to hit the infinity button.
Really?
Yes.
What?
Graham's number. So before I wrote about Graham's number for reference is just there's these endless giant numbers you could conceive of, but this one is famous because it's one of the biggest numbers ever used in an actual mathematical proof. So it's a real number that mathematicians have used.
Right.
And before I knew about this, I would have said something like the biggest number. Okay, well, you know what a googolplex is? A Google is 1 with 100 zeros.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
big number.
I could write a Google in 2 minutes, 1 minute. 1 minute of little zeros, done. Okay. You would have to have the universe packed with tiny grains of sand, packed all directions, all to the observable universe. And that is 1/10 billionth of a Google, grains of sand. So you'd have to now go on to, what a googolplex is it's 1 with a Google zeros. So now picture each of those tiny grains of sand has 10 billion microscopic zeros written on it, and every direction for billions of light years in every direction is just sand, 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 tiny grains of sand. Each one has 10 billion zeros. That is the number googolplex. So that's a Google zeros. Now the number googolplex, of course, this is just writing it out. That's just writing the number. So I would have said before something like the biggest number I could conceive of is like a googolplex to the googolplex power. And then I started, and I'm not going to get into it fully here because it's very nerdy. But basically, if you start just doing this, you can have these iterations of signs. So addition is iterated counting. So I can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or I can just go 1 plus 4 and shoot all the way to 5. I can go 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, or I can go 5 times 5 and skip it and just it's like you're doing a shortcut. An addition shortcut is multiplication. A multiplication shortcut is exponentation. So I can say 3 times 3 times 3, or I could say 3 to the third, right? 3 to the 100th. And that's just 2 numbers as opposed to writing 3 times 300 times. And so the point is so you go addition, multiplication, exponentation, you can keep going. And you can go to the next and next and next and next. And you keep going, crazy things start to happen where like a googolplex to the googolplex power is like child's play. You realize it's like nothing. So anyway, if someone's actually nerdy enough to like that, they can go and search wait-but-why Graham's number and read it. But the point is that some of these numbers get so big that it literally like gives me nightmares thinking about how big the number is. Okay, so 3 to the third, to the third, to the third. Just that little 4 tower is like a size of a googolplex. Now, what if that tower went all the way to the sun? And now if you multiply that tower out, and that's the height of the next tower, and you just keep going the point is you very quickly get to a place where it's like no one would want to be conscious for anywhere near that long. And then you could just keep going. So I promise you don't want to be conscious forever. It would be the worst torture is living forever that someone could possibly imagine. It's just too much time. The amount of time is scary that you'd have to be around. It's scary to think about.
It's interesting. I'm not persuaded by that at all. So here is what I have found is when two intelligent, well-meaning people disagree, they have different base assumptions. And if for what you're saying to make sense, one of your base assumptions is that there is some stacking level of fatigue, and that as that fatigue grows, you just can't imagine being alive. What I would say is, let's play a game that I play with myself all the time whenever I'm getting overwhelmed by the past. And that is to say, what if I literally just came into existence right now, this second, and all of my memories are just context so that I, as a meat AI, can keep moving forward, that I have enough contextual information that I can have a decision-making rubric, and so I can move forward. I could ask the exact same question in the opposite direction. What if I have existed forever, but you just have this either looping memory setup, or you forget everything beyond the last 25 years or last 1,000 years, if you're comfortable with 1,000 years. Once you remove that, I'm going to take sort of psychic scars and have this ever-increasing psychic fatigue, why would you ever want to unplug?
But if you're looping memory, isn't that just living a bunch of different lives? That's like reincarnation. You're not really you. So you might as well be someone else. You could say that when you die, a new kid is born, and that might as well be you with your memory now looped.
Yeah, and so I'm trying to soothe you, not me. So I don't believe that it stacks with like these psychic scars, or that I will at any point want to reset. But I am also very cognizant that those in a meat suit, for sure, assuming we are meat suits, whatever this is,
Yeah.
if I'm the only conscious being and everybody else is not,
Right.
I have to be very careful not to let those things stack. And this is why people ask me all the time, so, hey, you're wealthy, you've already succeeded, why are you working so hard? And the reality is, because I understand the way the human mind works, which is you can never eat a meal so satisfying that you'll never be hungry again. So I've just completely given myself over to the nature of the human animal, that I will always want to strive, I will always want progress, I will always want to grow and be more. And so in giving myself over to that, never thinking that there is a finish line, the only thing that bums me out, the gray clouds, are I will run out of the ability to generate ATP long before I run out of things that I'm passionate about. And so that is the thing that scares me, is living a life that lacks meaning or something that just energizes you to the extreme. That would be scary. But I have not, I don't want to bullshit you, I would say I've not known a day where I didn't have that sort of drive and joie de vivre. It's not quite true.
So you're saying that here's my life so far. When I see is an atom. Okay, this is what I've lived so far, and on this atom, it's always been good, and I've never wanted to not be around, and never even begun to fatigue.
Yep.
And now you're saying, so therefore, if we pack the observable universe with atoms, so they're touching each other all everywhere, and then each of those universes gets shrunk down to the size of an atom, and we pack the universe with universes of atoms, right? And we just keep doing that.
Yes.
You're confident that on all of those atoms, it's going to be a life worth living. You're not going to be begging to be unconscious and saying that is a lot of confidence from having experienced one atom. And again, you can keep doing this. You can now do this a universe of atoms number of times.
Is your base assumption that in all of that amount of time, something is statistically likely to go so wrong that I will want out of this?
It's that the amount of time is so vast.
Mm-hmm.
It is, it is, I'm saying, I wrote this post, and you have to actually like read the post step by step for a second.
No, you got me there. Like, I understand what you're saying.
But it's like you don't even, because I don't even right now. It's like it's even what I just said about the universe full of atoms and then smaller. That is like in the post. That's like a joke. What I just said. It's like the scale of Graham's number is, and then you could say like Graham's number, a Graham's number time, whatever it is so crazy that it's just like there's no way you don't go completely mad. And it's like,
does all of your anxiety go away if I say you can kill yourself at any time?
Of course.
Okay, so this is just
my optimal situation is that death becomes voluntary and people can bow out when they're ready. I would love to press the infinity button on like someone else forcing me to die.
I would admittedly press the infinity button, I won't lie, but I would be much more comfortable if I had an exit.
Yeah, that thought experiment is that you have to. There's nothing you can do to kill yourself. You will be conscious for that amount of time, and the infinity button. You would.
Are you worried about being alone? Are you worried about suffering? What's the?
It's did you see the Black Mirror episode where there's a Black Mirror episode where a guy is a simulated guy, whatever. He's a real consciousness and is in this house, and the people who are running his simulation, it's like every minute that goes by for them is 1,000 years for him.
Ooh, I don't think so.
What?
I don't think I've seen it.
Okay.
I get it, but
The
I don't
point
think
is,
I've seen
every
it.
minute that goes by for them is 1,000 years of experience for this guy just in the house. And this is a sick show. It likes to do really sick concepts. So they say, should we, should we like shut him off now? No, let's leave him for the next few days. And so I did the calculation. I was like, he's in there for 2 million years, and he just can't, whatever. And again, that is like, so that's a moment when you're like, oh my God. So even if you were living like a rich life, like 2 million years, and again, this is nothing compared to the vastness of time is a very scary concept to me if you had to be there for it. It's like we can't even conceive of a million years. 1,000 millennia is very hard for us. But that is like, okay, you can kind of picture a millennium and you can picture 1,000, whatever. But then, yeah, so I challenge you to read the Graham's number post and then tell me that you want to press the infinity button, because I don't think you do.
All right, I'll check it out for sure.
Okay.
Dude, this has been amazing. Where can people find you?
My blog, Wait But Why, and my email address is my email list, which is, you can just find that on any blog post of mine at the bottom, is how people know when I post something new, because I don't do it regularly. I do it sporadically, and so people should sign up for the email list. And then Twitter, Wait But Why.
I love it. All right, guys, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. And until next time, my friends, be legendary. Take care. Peace. If you agree that the culture war is way too important to ignore, be sure to check out this episode with Konstantin Kisin.
Victimhood sells well. People in our current society believe that being a victim gives you advantages, because it does.